markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is 10:40 on Wall Street. I'm Nathan Hager. We'll start with this red headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Sam Bankman-Fried to testify at his fraud trial. Lawyers for the 31-year-old co-founder of FTX told the judge today their client will testify in his own defense in that multi-billion-dollar crypto fraud trial. As for the market, stocks are moving lower after a batch of corporate earnings. Traders are also keeping a close eye on the Treasury market for clues on the outlook for interest rates and the economy. Marvin Lowe is senior global macro strategist at State Street.
Duration is much more than just your fixed income holdings. The U.S. equity market is very duration heavy, so you've got to be really conscious of where those long yields are affecting your portfolio. Keeping powder dry right now is not a crime. Absolutely not, particularly given the shape of the curve, particularly given that the Fed's going to be higher for longer, probably for a lot longer than people think in my mind. Keep that powder dry because things are still going to be rough going into next year.
And we check the markets all day long here on Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is down 0.8%, down 33 points. The Dow is down 0.2% or 72 points. The NASDAQ leading the declines down 1 1/3% or 175 points. Alphabet shares the biggest decliners, down 9% after disappointing cloud results. The 10-year Treasury is down 19 seconds, yield 4.90%. We got some new crude oil inventory numbers from the Energy Information Administration, a rise of 1.37 million barrels, the highest since October 6th. NYMEX crude is down 0.6% at $83.22 a barrel. COMEX gold up at 0.2% at 1989.60 per ounce. The euro 1.0589 against the dollar. The yen 149.90. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Yeah, very good. Appreciate that. Nathan Hager, very, very good. We appreciate that as always here. Matt, Sam Bankman-Fried to testify at his fraud trial. Can we see this on TV? Is this stuff televised?
I mean, when I saw that headline crossed, I was so excited because sheerly because of the drama.
Yeah.
The decision I find questionable, but I guess I get it. I mean, reportedly, it's not always the smartest move to make. On the other hand, some people have said he needs to throw this Hail Mary because he's losing the game.
Right.
Then I got kind of bummed out because I remembered as Katie Greifeld was talking about the surveillance state, there's no cameras allowed.
Yeah.
So we've seen everybody else who's not in prison, who comes to testify, right. But we haven't seen Sam Bankman-Fried. And the court sketches are, horrendous. I know it's subjective, but they're no bueno. They're just not realistic at all.
Yeah, we need to get some cameras in there. I'll see if I can make a phone call there.
He's got a haircut, and I need to see it.
You need to see the haircut.
Tom Keene was pointing out, no one cares if he gets a haircut. That's because we can see it all the time.
Right.
All
right, we had some tech earnings last night. We're going to get some more the remainder of this week. You got Amazon still to go after the close mañana. Let's check in with Angelo Zeno. He's a senior industry analyst at CFRA Research. Angelo, we had last night Alphabet, better known as Google, and Microsoft report some numbers, and it seems like for both companies, it's all about the cloud. Give us your takeaways from some of those big-name tech names last night.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is all about the cloud, at least, after seeing those numbers. I mean, Alphabet was a disappointment on the cloud side of things, sharp deceleration. I think well below what anybody anticipated at a 22% growth rate. We were looking closer to 26 to 28%. And, they're clearly losing share to Microsoft and Azure, which saw actually an acceleration of their cloud business, growing 29% from the 26% growth rate we saw just last quarter on their end of things. And listen, I mean, as far as Alphabet is concerned, they are a much smaller player in the cloud side of things. So they should be growing above the growth pace of Microsoft. And the fact that they're not is a big problem. I think the other issue with Alphabet as far as the numbers were concerned is as you start falling behind the competition, there's always concern that you may need to spend a little bit more to kind of keep up with the pack. And I think going into 2024, there could be some concern that, maybe Alphabet will need to spend a little bit more than what consensus out there is anticipating. So that's probably what's weighing on the stock. significantly. And then on Microsoft side of things, I'd say it's as good a quarter as you possibly, probably could have gotten, executing again on the cloud side, like I mentioned, but also when you kind of look at Office Commercial, growing, high teens growth percentage pace, and then, Copilot launching next week, it gives them all the momentum in the world kind of going into the December quarter and into calendar 2024, as they seem like they are kind of the clear leader here on the AI side of things.
Yeah, I mean, a leader on cloud, right? And a leader in AI, both places that Google seems to be dragging. I mean, I note that Sundar Pichai over at Alphabet says, "I'm pleased with our financial results and our product momentum this quarter with AI-driven innovations across search, YouTube, and blah, 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 blah." I don't see any AI-driven innovations there, and it's possible, it's likely that they're there and I just don't notice. But isn't that important? The marketing side of it important? Are they doing anything with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, listen, one, they are kind of ahead of the game in terms of the infrastructure that they're building, at least as far as kind of their internally designed chip, right? Their TPUs, which they were way ahead of the game on that side of things. So, in terms of kind of getting a lower cost structure from that perspective, I think they are ahead of the game. But and listen, just like Meta, which is going to report after the close today, they are going to be a leader in terms of kind of leveraging their AI into improving kind of the back end, getting search generative experience in terms of their search business, as well as implementing it into YouTube here over time. But yeah, I mean, to your point, at the onset here, kind of early days, it doesn't look like that Alphabet, at least kind of early on, is executing and implementing some of the AI capabilities across their ecosystem, maybe the way Microsoft is doing on their end, or what potentially Meta is actually doing with some of their rankings and recommendations on their end as well. So definitely kind of investors want to see more out of Alphabet, clearly, given the stock performance here that we just haven't seen yet on the AI side of things.
Well, how about on the Meta front, again, reporting after the close? What's the street really looking for there? I mean, again, a digital advertising play like Google. Stock's up 156% year to date. What's the Meta story here? Is it all cost cutting, or is there still a cloud play there as well?
So listen, I think I wouldn't say there's a cloud play here, but as far as kind of Meta is concerned, I mean, the growth rates are accelerating here into Q3 and Q4. We're looking at digital ad growth, for them to eclipse 20%. And you look at Alphabet's results, right? It wasn't all bad. They actually did see some nice search numbers, some good YouTube numbers. So the digital ad, the ad space is performing fairly well. I think, maybe there is some concern about what guidance is going to look like here in Q4, given some of the comments made from Snap last night in terms of, what's going on in the Middle East. Although I wouldn't expect, much negativity on that side of things right now. But maybe to your point, I think all eyes is going to be on the cost side of things. More along the lines of what 2024 is going to look like. They should give some indication here, like they did last year in terms of on their call. We do expect, a big hike on the CapEx side of things. But if OpEx, for instance, is north of $100 billion here in 2024, that's going to cause the stock to, to see a negative reaction. So I think all eyes is really going to be on the OpEx number here tonight.
All right, Angelo, thanks so much for joining us. Angelo Zeno there from CFRA, talking to us about the results that we've seen and those that are coming. It really is a huge batch of earnings. I look back over 5 years, Paul, as I always do, to see how the stock has performed, because I had a theory.
You have a theory.
Among the big tech companies, those that have changed their name to something stupid and has nothing to do with their main business should be underperforming. And it's partially true. I mean, Microsoft is up 232% over the last 5 years, total return. That's much better than what Google has done. They call themselves Alphabet, up 130%, or what Meta has done. Facebook obviously is up 104%. But Amazon is not doing quite as well. And they haven't changed their name to something dumb. They're only up 40% over the past 5 years. So
interesting. Okay. All right, we're going to get Amazon.
So my theory's wrong.
Well, it needs a little bit more work.
Yeah.
We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
Matt may be onto something. Good morning, guys. It's good news and bad news for Boeing as a U.S. plane maker reiterated its yearly cash flow forecast but lowered its annual target for 737 aircraft deliveries. We have more from Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle.
They've maintained the free cash flow outlook for this year. They are keeping the goal of $3 billion to $5 billion in free cash flow. They've also kept their mid-decade targets. And offsetting that 737 weakness is the 787 wide body. The production targets there are looking pretty solid. Now, for the 737, they guided down to 38 jets per month. They're hoping that will increase by the end of the year. For the 787, that bigger plane, they're looking at 10 jets per month.
Boeing shares now down about 2.5%. The jet engine venture between General Electric and a French company has found more bogus parts from a UK manufacturer. Bloomberg's Gina Cervetti has that story.
Aircraft engine maker CFM International found that 145 engines in the global fleet have been fitted with the suspect parts linked to London-based AOG Techniques. That firm is behind an alleged scheme to sell components backed by forged records. CFM had previously said it found 126 affected engines.
Major airlines, including United, Delta, Southwest, have all found and removed the suspect parts from their fleet. Checking in with General Electric right now, they're down about 0.5%. And injuries among Amazon employees are more common than previously thought. Researchers at the University of Illinois say nearly 70% of Amazon's warehouse workers have taken unpaid time off to recover from job-related pain or exhaustion. Amazon shares down about 3.5%. I'm Lisa Mateo.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets here, we've got red on the screen. The S&P 500 off 0.8%. NASDAQ taking on the trend on the back of some of those, kind of uneven tech earnings we got last night, off 1.5%. Yields higher today. 10-year Treasury up about 8.5 basis points, 4.90 on your 10-year, and again 5.03 on your 30-year. So a solid 5 handle on the 30-year. You can sit out there for 30 years. It's not too bad. Bitcoin up another 3% today, 34,700 on Bitcoin. So big movement there on the backs of a potential spot ETF for Bitcoin. How good would that be? Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. Amy Marsh has got world national news.
All right, thank you, Paul. Sam Bankman-Fried is expected to take the stand at his trial later this week. The one-time crypto star is on trial in New York on allegations of fraud, money laundering, and other offenses. Now, this is a risky move. It opens him up to cross-examination. His defense is he did not intend to commit fraud. While diplomacy over Israel-Hamas has turned more tense at the United Nations, President Biden has been keeping up efforts of his own to keep the conflict contained. Bloomberg Government's Jonathan Tamari has more from Washington.
It's a very big concern for Biden and the U.S. and frankly, other international partners that this war not spill over into even other reaches of the Middle East, into Lebanon, involving Iran. It could be very destabilizing and devastating, and they're trying to avoid that.
Bloomberg Government's Jonathan Tamari is in the nation's capital. Mark Meadows is the final chief of staff to Donald Trump and has been given immunity from prosecution in the election interference probe against the former president. We get more on this from Greg Valliere, chief U.S. policy strategist at AGF Investments.
It's huge. I mean, he knows where all the bodies are buried. He knows what happened. He also may continue to lead a sort of domino effect where others cooperate, maybe even Rudy Giuliani. So I think that Trump is facing his greatest challenge and can't rule out Trump going to jail.
Greg Valliere of AGF Investments tells us we might see more Trump associates decide they want to cooperate with investigators, too. A Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll finds Donald Trump is ahead of Joe Biden in swing states with a narrow edge that is within the margin of error. In Wisconsin, 79% of registered voters said the economy is on the wrong track. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg. Paul and Matt.
All right, Amy Marsh, thank you so much. We appreciate that. I don't know, the red headline that got my attention this morning, Sam Bankman-Fried to testify at his fraud trial. I mean, I'm no lawyer, but I don't know about that. Sonali Basak, she's all over this Wall Street stuff, this crypto stuff. We got a few minutes of Sonali's time here. Sonali, what's going on in this trial here? This seems like almost a desperation move, but what do I know?
Listen, we know Sam Bankman-Fried has loved to speak for himself.
Yes, that's true.
Before he was indicted, he had spoken outwardly a lot as FTX was crashing. And so it's in some ways not surprising to see him wanting to speak for himself. Plus, he has been very effective, of course, in winning over a lot of hearts and souls, and this is a jury trial. The government has put forward a lot of evidence, including at least 3 of his friends that have pled guilty for reduced sentences and who have testified saying that Sam directed them to commit crimes. And so this is his chance to defend himself. Now, will it be effective or not is something to be watching over the next week.
But it may be just a Hail Mary pass that he has to try and throw, right? Because it looks like to me, and as we've been saying, there are no cameras in there, so we're not watching this. I'm just relying on reporters like you that bring us the intel. It looks like he's losing this trial.
Listen, we're in America, innocent until proven guilty. And, the thing about this is for weeks, and this is where you're getting that feeling from, the government has brought forward one after another testimony, documents, people who have said that they believe that Sam not only committed a crime himself, but directed them to do so. And conspiracy to commit fraud is part of the charges here. Now, at the worst, he could face life in prison. Will something like this reduce a sentence? He's making the case, or his lawyers rather, have made the case that this has been a risk management issue for FTX rather than a intent to commit any sort of fraud. And intent is an important part of this.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned 3 of his closest confidants, co-founders, testified directly against him in court. That had to be just brutal.
Well, it looks
including
like
his ex-girlfriend.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, my ex-girlfriends are the most likely to testify.
He's a really nice guy, I swear.
The thing is, like, they clearly, I want to be careful because it seems as though they were definitely taking customer funds. Commingling was what this all sort of started with.
Well, this is the defense. So the commingling, right? Alameda taking customer funds from FTX. What Sam's defense is that these were margin loans and that many customers of FTX had taken margin loans. Now, where it gets complicated is you have had coders and developers step up on stand and say that they were creating code that essentially served as a backdoor to take money from from FTX to Alameda, the hedge fund that had taken the customer funds. Sam calls those margin loans.
Well, if they were margin loans, and if that was allowed under the agreement, because a lot of customers saw some contract writing that said, we're not going to be using your funds for these types of investments. But if they were margin loans and that was okay, then who cares if they were taken out of a back door or a front door or just a door?
When people engaged in crypto, as you and I both know, they did so without FDIC insurance like a normal bank would have, without the semi-regulatory body approval that the normal exchanges that trade stocks and bonds in the United States have. They're highly regulated, and when people engaged in business with FTX, there was not that set of safety. And so unless you were in the US, which was more siphoned off from the larger FTX global body. So, you know, to the point, let's see how this plays out. It's early. Bernie Madoff had essentially turned himself in. So this trial is inherently different from the last large case we've seen of this kind because Sam has been defending himself from day one.
Wow, this is going to be interesting, really compelling stuff. Shelley Bassick, thanks for giving us a couple minutes of your time.
I wish we got to see it. I wish they had cameras in that courtroom.
Let's go in here with your phone. You think we could do that?
I don't think
Post
so.
it? No?
No.
Okay. All right. Very.
Take your phone at
They
the door.
take your phones at the door. Okay. Very smart. They're on to me already. Let's head to Nathan Hager down in Washington, D.C., get a quick business flash and reset here.
Don't get into trouble. There's enough trouble in the markets right now. We check the markets for you all day long here on Bloomberg. Stocks are moving lower with investors grappling with corporate earnings, the disappointment from Alphabet and the cloud sector in particular, dragging NASDAQ shares lower, and the bond sell-off appears to be back on with 10-year treasuries down 19/30 seconds at 4.90%, off the 5% level, but elevated bond yields are weighing on appetite for stocks as well. Kate Kaminsky is Chief Research Strategist at Alpha Simplak.
It does feel right now, in terms of how we're seeing the markets trade, that we're at a point where there's some interest to buy because we've come so far in this disinversion in the yield curve. And so I think the next step is going to be, what's the next phase of this bond trade? Is it wait and see if we see something that could push us to a new shape of the yield curve? Or do we go to a state where we have worse financial conditions and we have to actually stop tightening, and thus see, the shorter end has to release some of the pressure?
Again, the 10-year yield 4.90%. The 2-year is at 5.09. S&P's down 0.7% or 30 points. The Dow is little changed now, down 4 points. The NASDAQ still moving lower, down 1.3% or 176 points. NYMEX crude's down 1.2% now at $82.66 per barrel. COMEX gold's little changed at $19.8520 an ounce. The euro 1.0584 against the dollar. The yen 149.94. Bitcoin up 3.5%, trading close to 35,000. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Well, all right, Nathan Hager, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Boy, a red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Israel agrees to delay ground invasion of Gaza. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. So that is certainly big news, and we'll have further reporting on that going forward.
You got to wonder what it means, right? I mean, that's just one headline. We don't have the story from the Wall Street Journal yet, but, who is Israel in this case agreeing? Does that mean Netanyahu has agreed to delay? He's got a coalition government that he's just formed. Do they all agree to delay the ground invasion?
Yep.
What, for a few hours, for a day, or I know they're working very hard on getting hostages back.
Yeah, that seems to have been I think the message of President Biden and some of the other Western allies of Israel. They've all made their way to Israel to meet with the leadership, and that has clearly been one of the messages here. Just a little bit of caution maybe And again, the focus has been on the hostages, Matt, as you point out. So maybe this suggests maybe something's happening there. So we'll keep on that. We'll have all the latest reporting on that. The markets are trading kind of mixed here. The S&P's off its low of the day, still off about 0.6%. Jess Metton joins us here in studio. Jess, what are you looking at in the markets?
Well, looking at the communication services sector in the S&P 500, down about 4.7%. So this would be its worst potential day if those losses do hold through the close since October of last year. And of course, the stock that's weighing on that sector is Alphabet. So when you are looking at that ticker symbol GOOGL, down about 8.7%. So on pace since its worst day since about a year ago. And also, if it hits the 10% mark, if it were to drop that much today, that would be its steepest decline since March of 2020. So we know that obviously with the results that we saw after the bell yesterday, that its cloud unit did post a smaller than expected profit, but that also comes at a contrast when we are looking at Microsoft, who had better than expected earnings. And especially a lot of that on the cloud side was driven by the fervor for a lot of the AI different products there. So you're seeing two different stories there. And when you do go to BI Go, if you want to look at the earnings data from Bloomberg Intelligence, you can go to BI Go, and then there's on the left-hand side that you can go to equities, and then you can click on fundamentals, and then you have a number of different options where you can kind of gauge what the overall forecasts are. And
hang on a second.
Sure.
I type in BI Go.
Oh boy, here we go.
I'm on the left side of the screen. I see equity/industry.
So click on BI Equity Strategy.
BI Equity Strategy, okay.
Yes, and then there's going to be a drop-down menu, and then click on...
You guys are where everybody in the cars
at
home don't have?
I just want to figure this out. So I
Yes.
click on BI Equity Strategy, and then I click on...
Equity.
Equity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when you see data library,
fundamentals,
fundamentals. So this is going to take you to an overall, if you do the SPX earnings tracker, for instance, that's where you can see where expected preseason forecast was for contraction year over year, 1.2% decline. The latest growth is about 0.6%. I wanted to point out, though, because we're talking about the communication services sector, if you look out further in the third quarter, actually the communications sector is expected to post more than a 30% earnings gain compared to obviously the preseason estimate for the overall index of just over 1%. So really all segments in that sector, except for media, which I know Paul has a lot of opinions on when we are talking about stocks like Disney. So those are expected to post gains. And even when you are talking about Alphabet and Meta, I mean, overall, Alphabet still beat on a number of different metrics. But obviously, when we do think about when it comes to the search engine being sort of the dominant focus there, but then also what that means when you're looking at cloud computing, and because some of those forecasts came in not as strong as expected, you're seeing that weighing on that stock. And another one I like to typically look at is I do MEMB for members to see the weightings for the different stocks in the S&P 500. You can also do that for the NASDAQ 100 as well, but you can see there that Alphabet is the fifth largest weighting there in the S&P 500, so just over a 2% weighting there. But then when you do have other big kind of tech and growth stocks down too, that's obviously going to weigh overall on the sector. And then I also wanted to point out the SOX, so the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. We did get results from chipmaker Texas Instruments. Also, that's ticker symbol TXN. That stock's down more than 3.5%, so on pace for its worst day since late July. So it did have a disappointing revenue forecast for the fourth quarter, and a lot of that was really implying that demand is pretty sluggish for a broad range of different electronic equipment products there. So it has actually A&R function if you look at that for Texas Instruments. 12 buys, 23 holds, 4 sell ratings among analysts that are tracked by Bloomberg. But you are seeing, if you are looking at the SOX, it's up nearly 30% year to date, though, because there've been such a big snapback in a number of those stocks that had, and that particular gauge for chip makers was down more than 35% this year. So it's actually cut a little bit of those year-to-date gains, but still has bounced back a lot. But when you are seeing that pressure today, that is driven by Texas Instruments.
All right, very good. Jess Metton, thank you so much. As always, Jess Metton, she covers all the markets for us at Bloomberg, joining us here in our studio here. Further reporting coming out of the Wall Street Journal, Israel has agreed to delay its invasion of Gaza so the U.S. can get missile defenses in place to protect American troops in the region, again, according to the Wall Street Journal. So we'll have updated reporting on that.
I mean, how long does that take?
I don't know.
You have to imagine that the mightiest military in the world can get missile defenses in place in a relatively short order, right?
I would think so.
So hold off for what, like 6 hours until we move these batteries over here?
Plus, we got 2 aircraft carrier groups in the Med, so that says something.
I mean, this is very interesting because surely it doesn't take us more than a day to move batteries around.
Let's put some phone calls out to some of our military friends out there, like Admiral Stavridis and some other folks, see if we can get some of those smart folks on to help us decipher what might be happening here. All right, interest rates are moving higher. I thought that's good for net interest income for the banks. We've seen some big banks put up some big net interest income numbers, but it also impacts the value of the bonds on their balance sheets. I forgot about that part of it. Herman Chan joins us. He's a senior analyst. He doesn't forget anything.
Never forget.
U.S. regional banks and fintech. He covers it all for Bloomberg Intelligence. So, Herman, talk to us about this rising interest rate environment. What does it mean for kind of the regional banks out there in the United States that most of us do our banking with?
Right, sure. So higher rates typically are better for banks, but they need to be moving in a slow, measured fashion with rates whipsawing that they did earlier last year, this year. That has proven to be a bit more volatile for banks. So you saw the benefit of that last year when interest rates rose, net interest income rose for the banking group. Now those benefits are being pushed back to consumers and business customers as deposit costs are rising. So it's been a double-edged sword on the rate front. You mentioned earlier that higher rates means higher unrealized gains in their bond holdings, and that's happening, and that's weakening book value.
By the way, Herman, so when I think of these bonds that are underwater, back in March, I imagined regional banks using April, May, June, July, and August to get rid of those holdings. Why on earth would you still want to have zero coupon treasuries?
Well, the issue is that if you sell the bonds, then you crystallize the loss on their balance sheet, right? So that the banks don't want to do that, especially ahead of tougher capital rules and tougher capital requirements ahead.
Okay, not all of it, but don't you try and minimize your underwater bond portfolios?
You can do that in a few ways. You can hedge. So some banks have done that, which is good to see. So any future rate movements will be less pronounced on the unrealized losses, but some haven't, and maybe you could say they dropped the ball on that front.
So they're still holding these. They haven't found some greater fool to take those portfolios.
They have not. They're just waiting for these underwater securities to mature quarter after quarter.
Wow.
All right. So what's the stock market doing to the regional bank names? Are they just throwing all of them out the window, or are they trying to find winners and losers?
At this point, it seems like there's a lot of negative sentiment out there. And we've seen a number of banks in my coverage universe at 52-week lows over the past week or so. So we talked about weaker margins. There's not a lot of loan growth as well. And then we haven't really seen the decline in asset quality that's coming ahead for the regionals in terms of exposure to office properties and the like. So unfortunately, there's a lot of headwinds, and it's hard to foresee some of these headwinds going away over the next 3 to 6 months.
Is there a valuation call here where, I mean, these things have been trading forever. There's great history to see how these names have traded. Is there a floor where people just say, boy, if it gets to 0.8 book, I'm just holding my nose and buying these things? Is there
0.8?
Yeah, I don't know.
Try 0.4.
Maybe 0.4. Is there a point? And if so, where are we relative to that point?
Yeah, we're probably around like 1 times tangible book value, which historically has been a very low valuation.
In this country, because I remember I spent years in Germany.
Right. It's different where
1 is like, wow, if only I could have 1 times tangible book value.
Deutsche Bank would love that, I guess. It's different across the pond, but here in the U.S., 1 times tangible seems to be closer to a trough valuation. The stocks did bounce off of those lows, in May and June, but now we're sort of back towards that trough level. So there is. I would also point out that historically, some of these stronger banks do grow through M&A in periods of weakness. So if you see some further turmoil for the space, some of the stronger players do transact in M&A to get bigger at very attractive pricing. So that's something that could happen over time.
You know, I'm just wondering about loan growth because Torsten Slok, the economist over at Apollo, was out with a note a couple of days ago, and he had saying basically there are 33 million small businesses in the United States, which I didn't know that number. That's good to have in the back pocket. Mm-hmm. But their average borrowing cost has now reached 10%.
Right.
At 10%, am I taking out a loan to expand my business or to start a new business? What are your banks telling you?
Yeah, they've talked about that very point that banks, that bank clients and business customers are delaying investing because of the higher rate environment. They've talked about potentially waiting for spreads to tighten a bit more, which may be a bit wishful thinking at this point. So you have seen less demand across the regional banking space by business customers because of the higher interest rates.
Yep, very good. Herman Chan, thank you as always, keeping us up to date on what's happening in the world of the regional banks across the U.S. Again, the news coming out of the Wall Street Journal is that Israel is delaying its invasion of the West Bank so can move missiles to the U.S. can move missiles to the region, again, according to the Wall Street Journal. We want to check in with Galit Altstein. She is a Bloomberg News reporter based in Tel Aviv. So, Galit, it appears that there's going to be a delay in attacking. I guess one of the questions we have is, what's the average? Is the average Israeli getting frustrated at the delay in this attack?
Well, I wouldn't say that the average Israeli is getting frustrated. We're hearing various voices or different voices in this conversation, but I think that there is an understanding that, first of all, the invasion was supposedly delayed because the negotiations on possible hostage release were still going on, and they still are going on. And we heard the Qatari foreign minister say today that these negotiations are still ongoing and we could see more breakthrough soon. So this is, obviously a priority both for Israel and for other nations whose, nationals have been taken hostage into Gaza. So that's one thing. And I think that, in terms of public opinion, if you're asking on that, then that is pretty well understood. The report you mentioned in the Wall Street Journal on the U.S. wanting to move some more aerial defense systems into the area, this is something that we've heard, talked about over the last few days. This is after U.S. Military posts have been targeted in the region, I think mainly in Iraq and some other places. So I guess Israeli officials are saying that once the United States has gotten so involved, with Secretary of State Blinken visiting here, and of course President Biden visiting Israel, and showing such a support for Israel, and at the same time taking a rather unprecedented part in this operation or the planning of this operation. So that also, in a way, adds up and makes sense. So, and one last thing I will say on this is that there are quite a few voices who say that as long as the Israeli Air Force still has targets that it can strike from the air, as it has been doing for the past almost 3 weeks, that is also in favor of the ground operation that is being talked about, because it will make it I don't know if easier, is a good word to use in this context, but it will make it maybe easier or more simple when the ground forces go in to have them do what they need to do. When some targets and
right.
some defenses have been struck from the air.
Right, they're trying to make it less dangerous, I think, is the best way to put it for their soldiers, for IDF soldiers to move into Gaza. What do we know about the hostage situation? The number seems to keep going up now. I think the most recent report I read suggests there are 220 hostages being held by Hamas. How many have been released, and what's being given up to get these hostages? Clearly we're not, the U.S. does not negotiate with terrorists. That's a pretty important policy for obvious reasons. But Qatar is essentially our proxy in this situation, negotiating with Hamas. What are they giving up to get these people?
So that is a very good question. So on the numbers, so like you said, it's the IDF so far confirmed 222 people to have been taken hostage by Hamas, and 4 women have been released so far. A mother and daughter that are also have an American nationality were released over the weekend, and then 2 more Israeli elderly women were released just a few days ago. So 4 were released in total. We're not aware that anything had been given to Hamas at this time. We do hear some people say that Hamas is kind of using, these very few hostage releases, just 2 at a time, 4 in total, to buy more time, because they sort of understand that this is delaying partly Israel's ground invasion, and they want to buy this time, and they want to delay it as much as possible. Also because it is clear, I think, to everyone, both in Israel and probably Hamas as well, that and this is something that Israeli officials tell us as well, that the international legitimacy that Israel has is very wide now, and it has a lot of support from all Western countries basically, but there is a sort of of a sand clock, that eventually it's limited, window time frame that that Israel can have this legitimacy, and then maybe that's why Hamas is trying to buy this time with these small hostage releases to delay this ground operation. So we're not aware that they're getting anything in return, but this is definitely a motive that is being talked about a lot.
Very good. Galit, thank you so much for jumping on and giving us the latest reporting there. Galit Altstein, she's a reporter for Bloomberg News based in Tel Aviv. Again, the story out just moments ago, according to the Wall Street Journal, that Israel delaying its invasion of Gaza so the U.S. can move missiles to the region. We'll have continued reporting on that. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. and get some updates with Nathan Hager.
Okay, watching big losses in big tech this morning, Paul. We checked the markets all day long here on Bloomberg. The S&P is down 0.6%, down 27 points. The Dow is holding on to a gain. It's up 0.2% or 76 points. The Nasdaq leading the declines, down 1.4% or 180 points. The biggest decliner continues to be Google parent Alphabet. It is down close to 9% on disappointment in the cloud. It is failing to offset more positive results, particularly in the cloud from Microsoft. Those shares are higher by about 2.5%. And Microsoft is a big component of the Dow. 10-year is down 22.30 seconds. We continue to watch Treasuries under pressure this morning. The yield on the 10-year, 4.91%, a gain of about 9 basis points. NYMEX crude is down 0.4% at $83.37 per barrel. COMEX gold, little change, down $1.80 at $19.8440 per ounce. The euro, 1.0586 against the dollar. The yen, 149.95. Bitcoin higher by about 3%, trading close to 35,000. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
All right, Nathan Hager, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. We got rates moving higher yet again. More tough times for the fixed income space after a brutal 2022 across the space. I think this year the only place you're making money is in high yield. Go figure. Brian Whalen joins us. He is the co-CIO and generalist portfolio manager at TCW in the fixed income group over there. They got a couple shekels under management, so we always appreciate getting Brian's thoughts. Brian, again, we got yields moving higher, and I guess what kind of got a lot of people's attention over the last week or so was, boy, you don't have to just stay in a 2-year and get 5%. You can go all the way out the curve now to 30% and get 5% on the U.S. Treasury. What do you make about the movement in rates we've seen recently?
Yeah, it's been brutal. It kind of got kicked off this summer when the Treasury announced higher anticipated, debt issuance, and that just kind of unraveled. Volumes have kind of ebbed and flows, but it just kind of feels like a market that nobody wants to step in front of, regardless of the value that at least we see, and I think a lot of others are starting to see. As you said, all the way across the curve at this point.
So what has to happen before you can be comfortable getting back in here? I was thinking about when I was a kid, I used to be so bummed out that I missed buying like 17% 10-year treasuries.
Yes, exactly.
Right in the early 80s. And I always thought, wow, I wish my parents had bought more of those, before I sort of understood how it all worked. Am I going to look back at this moment and think, I wish I bought 5% 10 years?
I think so. I do. I remember the same feeling. I'm hearing about people buying, 17% strips way out, the curve in duration and this incredible total return in the bond market. I don't think we can promise that. The math just doesn't work that way. But I would tell you, think about 5% across the curve. Think about like what that's telling you in terms of like, the bond math. It either means that we're going to be here at a 5% funds rate for the next 5 years. It's Goldilocks, for a decade, or it means that the Fed still got to raise rates significantly from here, hundreds of basis points, only to then unwind that by a lot more on the way down, so that over the next 10 years, you average 5%. Both scenarios seem pretty unlikely to us. So it seems like, 5% on the Treasury curve looks like great value, and something we always try to remind ourselves is, you can't time the turn. More likely than not, whether it's a multi-kind of standard deviation event, some sort of financial accident, so to speak, or it's just kind of the natural kind of organic letting the air out of the economy and seeing unemployment start to rise and consumer spending start to come down. Either way, when the turn comes, you're probably not going to be able to kind of catch that. So it's best to start kind of adding now, dollar cost averaging in, getting long, understanding that you may be some bumps and bruises along the way, but over the long term, it's going to provide a really nice return for you.
Well, let me ask a similar question. It's kind of the same question a different way. I got a viewer or listener writing in asking if you have a rates view here. Are we higher because of technical inflation and stronger growth, or is it fundamental structural change in ownership of rates and issuance to remain very elevated?
I think the latter, the whole issuance thing, is a little bit kind of like finding a narrative to fit the price action. I mean, historically, there is no correlation between issuance and the way rates move. You can see periods where there's issuance is high and rates go higher. You can see periods where issuance increases, but rates rally because of the more macro event. I think we're here because, let's be honest, the U.S. economy has been stronger than people expected, and so the Fed's had to go higher. We haven't seen anything break yet, outside of a few regional banks, earlier this year. And so I think there's just a fear that it might take more to kind of slow this economy down and bring inflation back down toward 2%. But the house view here at TCW is that, that fear is more about kind of looking through the rear view mirror as opposed to kind of looking forward and understanding that all this monetary tightening, not just here in the U.S., but globally, it just acts with a lag, and people get impatient. But, this lag, whether it's from the time the Fed started hiking or when the curve went inverted, there's nothing unusual about it. They say it's a lag for a reason, and this has been consistent. And I think it's just going to take a little bit of patience to pay off.
But if you look at, so one of the other things I started doing after the regional banks broke down is looking at DebtGo on the Bloomberg to see who's holding all this U.S. paper. And I just can't imagine that previously it was always like the Japanese and the Chinese and all these foreign investors were buying our treasuries. You watch the dysfunction in the U.S. government and the fact that even in a strong economy, we want to have $2 trillion deficits. Like, why would any foreigner want to hold this paper? We're good for it.
I do two things. One, first of all, we pretty much always run deficits. That's nothing new. And we're always dysfunctional. We're just the least dysfunctional out there, or one of the least. And so I don't, that doesn't hold a lot of water for us. I think more relevant to the reason we haven't seen foreign investors buying a lot of U.S. treasuries or agency mortgage-backed securities has to do with the fact that the hedging costs have been so high. And that really relates to where short-term interest rates are, and that's been set by the Fed. So as the Fed's taken rates from 0 to 5%, it's become very expensive for non-U.S. investors to buy our debt. However, if we are at or kind of very close to the peak in that rate, more likely than not, the U.S. dollar over time will start to come down. The hedging costs will come down. and the value of U.S. Treasuries at 5% or 4.5% or 4%, it's going to actually start to be more appealing to the non-U.S. Investor.
I like the we've always run deficits. It makes me feel a little better because in my house it's the same. You know, I've always spent more money than I make.
See, I just tell the world we're good for it.
But at a certain point, it's got to worry you, right? Stephen Major wasn't worried until he was, and you know, at some point it's got to be we're borrowing too much money. No.
Yeah, it's got to work. And you know what? You know, it's the little bond vigilantes. It's where that's come from. And at some point, the bond market's going to raise rates. It's gonna make the interest costs such a high burden that we're gonna have to fix our deficit problem, and we're gonna have to realign spending. We're gonna have to be, you know, more frugal, you know, with our pennies. And so it kind of feels like we're getting there. You know, we're seeing, you know, the percentage of interest cost as a percentage of GDP jump here, and if we continue to hang at these rates, it's going to have to force some very difficult decisions in DC. So, you know, more than likely than not, that's coming one way or the other.
All right, Brian, let's get to the important stuff. Yale football. Yale is 3-3. They welcome into New Haven this weekend the Columbia Tigers. Tell us about Yale football this year. What do you got?
You know, what a great program Tony Reno's got over there. He came in years ago and he took a program. He's made it one of the best in the league. We won the title last year, as I'm sure you know, and all your viewers know that. This year, it hasn't been as good as last year, but they've got a very, very solid offense. And I think we're going to turn this season around and win on out, which includes, you know, winning the big HYP and finishing with a victory over Harvard at right before Thanksgiving.
Good stuff. Good stuff for, so we like to watch Ivy League football. A lot of fun. Looks like there's a lot of parity in the league this year. All right, Brian, great stuff, buddy. Thank you. Brian
I love
Whalen.
going to an Ivy League football game.
Oh, it's great.
I will say.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
You should go to, I mean, where you live, you should go to a Columbia game. That's actually pretty close. And that's a great stadium, too. So Brian Whalen, co-CIO, Generalist Portfolio Manager, TCW Fixed Income Group. So that would be a good fall outing. Take the little one there.
Absolutely. And I also live up close to West Point. You know?
Yeah, that's great.
So those are also super
West Point
fun
is a
games.
phenomenal game to go to. Get there early so you can see the cadets march on the grounds, which is just awesome to see them out there marching. It's really cool.
And plus the drive up there.
Yeah.
For people who don't live in this part of the world, right now is one of the most beautiful times to drive up the Hudson Valley and cross over the river there in Rockland County. It's just super nice.
They do a nice boat trip from here from Manhattan. You take the boat up the Hudson River, it drops you off right at West Point to go to the game. It's a great way to spend an afternoon. So highly recommend. It's definitely a bucket list to go to Mikey Stadium at West Point. S&P 500 off 0.7%. The Dow's up 0.3%. So go figure there. The action today is in the tech-heavy NASDAQ, as they say, off 1.4%. Also calling out crude oil. We're sitting here right at $83.50 a barrel. Gasoline coming down, too, at the pump at the Wawa on Route 36 in Jersey. This is Bloomberg. Right now, we're going to head down to Washington, D.C., because we're going to get world and national news with Amy Mars.
Thank you, Paul. Less than a half hour from now, the House of Representatives will be voting on a fourth Speaker nominee, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, just a day after Donald Trump tanked the last candidate, House Majority Whip Tom Emmer. As he arrived at his civil fraud trial in New York, Trump spoke highly of Johnson.
He's popular, he's smart, he's sharp, he's going to be fantastic. I think he's going to be a fantastic speaker.
Mike Johnson was chosen after 3 rounds in an internal party ballot late yesterday. Sam Bankman-Fried will take the stand to defend his actions in the lead up to the collapse of his digital asset empire after former colleagues painted him as the mastermind of a years-long scheme to defraud customers and investors. Bankman-Fried faces decades in prison on charges that he directed the transfer of FTX customer money into hedge fund Alameda Research before both companies spiraled into bankruptcy. Israel has reportedly agreed to delay its invasion of Gaza so the U.S. can get missile defenses in place to protect American troops there. That's coming from the Wall Street Journal. The political debate over the war between Israel and Hamas has moved to the United Nations, where UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says Israel is violating humanitarian law. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook is in Tel Aviv.
This was the part that the Israelis took issue with. It is important to also recognize that the attacks did not happen in a vacuum. He also said that the Palestinians have been subject to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Tel Aviv telling us that Israel accused the UN Secretary General of being, quote, completely disconnected from the reality in our region. And we've told you Bloomberg News has learned Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, has been granted immunity in special counsel Jack Smith's federal election interference probe. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. I'm Nathan Hager. We check the markets all day long on Bloomberg. Stocks are mostly lower. We're seeing a little bit of life to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's up 96 points with help from Microsoft. Those shares are higher by about 2.5% on positive cloud earnings, but the tech-heavy NASDAQ is being dragged down 1.5% or 194 points. Google parent Alphabet, a big reason for that. Those shares are down 9%. Disappointment in the cloud has the Google parent facing a low of more than a year as far as those shares go. As for the broader market, the S&P 500 is down 0.7%. And we're seeing volatility return to the Treasury market. The 10-year is down 21/32 for a yield of 4.91%. The sell-off back on. The Federal Reserve isn't buying treasuries as it tightens its balance sheet. Jim Bianco with Bianco Research says the era of quantitative easing is over.
I think what we forgot in what I've seen in a lot of the discussion about the bond market was 2009 to 2020 was the QE period. Let me say it bluntly, that was the abnormal interest rate. We have not gone up. I know we've gone up 500 basis points, but we have not tightened by 500 basis points. We haven't tightened by anything close to 500 basis points.
We're seeing longer dated treasuries outpace shorter ones, with the 30-year down at 5.05%. The 2-year is at 5.09%, so some bear steepening happening in the session. NYMEX crude is down 15 cents at $83.62 per barrel. COMEX gold is up $3 at $19.89.10 an ounce. The euro 1.0593 against the dollar. The yen is at 149.9. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
All right, Nathan Hager, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio in New York City, also streaming live on YouTube. Boy, talk about a lot of cross currents out there in the marketplace. What with earnings, the movement in yields all over the place. We got stuff going on the geopolitical front. We got Washington, D.C. can't get out of its own way. What's an investor to do? John Porter joins us. He's the CIO of equities for Newton Investment Management. John, I got to start with my co-host here, Matt Miller. He is from Columbus, Ohio, so I got to go right to your University of Michigan, my friend. You get the undergraduate degree and the master's in aerospace engineering. That's a whole nother discussion. How for real is this Michigan football team this year? You guys look awesome.
Well, I'd like to see us play a real opponent first, but I will say I had a lot of fun. I was in East Lansing last weekend and watched the relatively one-sided affair against our friends, the Spartans. I almost felt bad for them in the end. Not quite, but almost.
All right, that game against Ohio State's going to be great. But first, you got to come in.
November 25th.
Yep. But first,
at the Big House up in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and before they got to come into Happy Valley to play my Penn State Nittany Lions.
Well, we already beat Penn State.
Yes, you did.
I have been to the Big House, and I have to say that I absolutely love it. It's a totally different kind of tailgating than, in Columbus, you're on the pavement in a parking lot, whereas you actually drive onto a golf course in Ann Arbor. And I don't know how the golf course owner allows that, but it's so much fun. The only problem is it's super depressing to be in Ann Arbor at the end of the game.
Why is that?
Because they've lost.
I don't think they have turned it around.
Last time.
They have turned around. Hey, so John, what do we do with this market here? Give me some direction here. I'm trying to look at earnings. I'm trying to get a sense of where the Fed's going. How do you guys approach it from 30,000 feet?
Well, I'll date myself a little bit. When I was in high school, there was a TV show called Hill Street Blues, and they always closed their morning meeting by saying, "Be careful out there." And I think those are good words for all investors to follow right now. Look, the bond market's in control as an equity investor. That has to be acknowledged. The 10-year move over the last 3 or 4 months from 3.75 to 5% has dominated the narrative, as it should. Equities, the equity outlook looks a lot different when you can get 5% in 10 years. And, that's driven the move in the S&P from 4,600 to 4,200. I think right now, tactically thinking over the next couple of months, there's a potential for a rally in both equities and bonds. It just on a lot of measures, we're oversold right now, and I think that sets up a possibility for a bit of a bounce here. But I think the longer term outlook is still quite difficult for equities at this valuation.
What about for active management? I mean, we've seen such amazing outflows over the past few years at really big names, T. Rowe Price, Franklin Resources, Aberdeen. And it just seems that this asset management industry is getting hit so hard because people are pulling money out of active management funds.
They are. And, look, I think whenever you talk to someone like myself, you have to understand their biases. And, at Newton, we're an active manager too. We're a pure active manager. So we believe in active management. But active management has had an awful lot of headwinds over the last decade. The low interest rate, free money environment has been a real challenge. The flow of assets from active to passive has been a challenge. You look at days like today, I manage a large cap growth strategy with the Russell 1000 growth as a benchmark. By 40 Act mutual fund rules, I'm not allowed to be overweight the two largest stocks in the index, which are Apple and Microsoft at 12 or 13% each in the benchmark. So that provides a headwind. Now I do believe that the volatile environment we're in, as you well described at the beginning of this conversation, sets up an environment that is much more well suited to active management. This isn't an environment where you can just go out and buy defensive stocks or growth stocks or cyclical stocks for that matter. I really think when we look at the investment environment right now, it's very much a stock picker's environment. And when we look over the next 2, 3, 4 years, we think we're going to see a much more volatile economic backdrop than we've seen over the last decade. And that lends itself quite well to active management. But we need to prove it.
And do you need to put it in an ETF wrapper?
Oh, absolutely. At Newton, we've launched probably 15 ETFs in the last couple of years. I think the industry is slowly acknowledging that some of the investment vehicles we've used in the past were a bit outdated. And at Newton, we've certainly acknowledged that, and we've embraced wholeheartedly the transparency and the better tax efficiency for our clients of wrappers like ETFs, other things like SMAs and model portfolios. We absolutely are moving rapidly in that direction.
John, what do you make of earnings so far? Or just not even halfway through, but kind of how did you approach this earnings season? What are you seeing here?
Yeah, I have been continue to be optimistic for the earnings season. I think we're going to get a GDP print tomorrow that's probably going to be approach 5% annualized year-over-year growth, which is spectacular economic growth. I think that bodes well for strong earnings, and certainly the sell-off coming into earnings gives me more optimism that we should see a positive reaction to what I expect to be solid earnings. So far, we haven't seen that yet. It's important to note, we've seen, it's early, but we've seen good earnings upside. The companies have reported so far, but the reaction from the equity market has been quite muted at this early stage in the earnings season. But I remain hopeful that by and large, it's going to be hard not to have a positively surprising earnings season with a GDP approaching 5%. I think when all is said and done, it will probably be a catalyst to start to put a little bit of a short-term bottom in equity markets and give us a little bit more of a positive outlook.
What happens to the energy space if we go into a recession, John? I mean, the economy looks great today, obviously, but we just spoke with Anna Wong over at Bloomberg Intelligence. She thinks we're going into a recession next year. So do CEOs that we talk to all the time. How do you deal with energy at $90 a barrel?
Yeah, it's an important question. Isn't it strange that we're sitting here about to see a 5% GDP, but one of the biggest concerns in the market is a recession next year? But I think it should be a concern. That was a concern at the beginning of this year. Hasn't come to pass clearly as of yet, but I still believe the odds are much higher than average. So I would agree with Anna's take on that front. I think energy, look, the most dangerous words an investor can say is this time is different. With energy, it's a cyclical industry. Historically, if we were about to go into a recession, it would be an area of the market you wanted to avoid. But I'll say those dangerous words. This time it's different. The capital restraint, the capital discipline of this sector is unlike anything I've seen in my almost 30-year career. You're seeing the companies, returning cash to shareholders, doing share buybacks. Obviously, we've seen some big M&A recently to get more, to get more capacity growth, but they're doing it through buying others as opposed to drilling more actively. The capital discipline, I think, is critically important here. The supply discipline that we're seeing from all energy producers globally, I think, sets up a supply-demand picture that is very favorable for equity returns. It's not favorable for the inflationary outlook. But when we look at commodity markets, particularly oil, natural gas to a certain extent as well, we see an incredibly tight supply situation that almost needs an economic slowdown to avoid, sort of a real steep increase in commodity prices. So I think energy would be a good place to be positioned despite the potential for a recession, as long as the recession is mild, modest in its magnitude and its duration.
All right, John, great stuff, man. Really appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. John Porter, he's the CIO of Equities at Newton Investment Management, a alum of University of Michigan. That is going to be a heck of a game this year.
We didn't even get to talk. Yeah, okay. So, but aside from football, we need to get John back on to talk about aerospace engineering, which is what he studied in Ann Arbor.
Well, that happens all the time. These guys that go get these amazing degrees, and then they go to Wall Street. Yeah,
but I just wonder if he has then thoughts on, you were talking to Guy Johnson this morning about Boeing and Airbus. I thought really fascinating conversation, 737 versus A320, and I wonder what he thinks.
Yeah, I was taking it. I thought the 737 MAX works just fine.
You love it.
I do love it.
I hate it.
Yes, all right. Let's switch gears here. Somebody darkened the door that we were not expecting, but hey, why not? This is Bloomberg. People are running around all the time that you just never know who you're going to find here. T-Mobile reported some numbers, some pretty darn good numbers, and the CEO is running around Bloomberg. So we said, hey, let's grab him in here. Mike Sievert, did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Sievert, he's the president and COO of T-Mobile. Some good numbers here. Talk to us about your quarter. Talk to us about the mobile business these days.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. This quarter showed that our remarkably consistent strategy just continues to work. This is the only wireless company in the 35-year history of this industry that's able to offer simultaneously the best value, but also the best network.
When did your network become the biggest? Did I blink and miss that?
It was when we completed our merger with Sprint and then spent 2 years combining the forces of the company. Sprint had the mother lode of spectrum, but not the financial wherewithal to build it out. And T-Mobile had this incredible growing brand, but didn't have the spectrum resources. And so it was a marriage that allowed us to put our heads down and go from dead last in the 4G LTE era to first and best in the 5G era. Today, as we speak, we have more landmass covered with ultra-capacity 5G, twice as much as our next nearest competitor. And that really shows the leadership that we have now, and that's one of the things that's contributing to all the share gains.
Is that I was, as a Cub reporter, I covered Deutsche Telekom out of Bonn, Germany, before they even moved to Berlin. I flew over with Ron Sommer to Seattle when he bought VoiceStream and threw out the first pitch at a Mariners
taking
game.
us back.
Yeah, this is 20-some years ago. But at the time, the idea was, and that was just after the 3G auction, so we're in a completely different world now. But at the time, the idea was you wanted this global network, which was awesome for jet setters, but obviously no one in Seattle really cares that much. They just want it to work where they live. What's the most important pitch to get somebody to switch over from telephone or Verizon to T-Mobile?
The whole story over the last decade or so of our historic growth run has been centered around this idea that we call the Un-carrier. That this industry was dominated by a duopoly of carriers that were famous for underserving and overcharging people. And so we wanted to be that. And what we did was created a brand that's all about customer advocacy, putting customers first, treating them right, changing the rules of the industry in their favor, and proving it year after year with iconic Un-carrier moves, like banishing the need for contracts and allowing people to upgrade when they want. And to your earlier point, allowing them to roam the world for free on their rate plan, keeping the data that they bought, enjoying unlimited, all the things that we've done, T-Mobile Tuesdays and breakthrough on customer loyalty. that show that we're willing to change the rules in their favor. And then you fast forward to now, to 2020 and beyond, where we've become the new version of ourselves. Add on to that, not just these lower prices and more customer centricity, but the best network too. And it's no surprise that we're experiencing some of the most historic growth rates ever in our history. This quarter alone, 850,000 postpaid net additions, by far the industry-leading number, for a good reason.
All right, what we'd like to do, Mike, when a CEO darkens our doors, put up your stock versus your peers on a 5-year basis. Compounded annual return for T-Mobile, 16.3% over the last 5 years. AT&T minus 1.2%. Verizon minus 5%. So clearly the equity market is rewarding the stock here. What are you telling your investors for the next 3 to 4 years in terms of your strategy to continue that kind of outperformance?
Well, now we're in a phase where our scale can lead to a massive delivery of cash flows and shareholder return. And it's not about moving into some staid low growth moment. We can continue to afford massive growth, market-leading growth, but this is a scale business. And so now it's also simultaneously about cash flow expansion. You know, this quarter's $4 billion in free cash flow, up 94% from a year ago. And we're outlooking cash flows next year that are higher. And so we're hitting this run rate now where we can begin to return cash to shareholders. We announced our first ever dividend last quarter, and that's a part of an overall shareholder remuneration program, including buybacks, that we see in the range of $60 billion within a 3.5 year time frame.
At the time that, 20 years ago, again, when Telecom and all these others have paid 50 billion euros to buy 3G licenses, they envisioned this conglomerate media business that would not only operate the network, but also create content and do a million other things. What are you looking at in terms of your strategy going forward? Is it just operating the network for your customers, or do you also want to, create and deliver content and do other, media like TMT businesses?
Yeah, luckily we didn't get sucked into that vortex at T-Mobile. Some of our competitors did, and boy, did they get themselves stung. That was a tough thing to see. Big acquisitions and then following big divestitures, at massive shareholder losses. And so that's not a path that we went down. But that doesn't mean we're not interested in adjacencies. We've plunged our company into broadband, for example. It's a very close adjacency. It has a lot in common with wireless. And for 6 quarters in a row, we've been the broadband growth leader in America, with more net additions this quarter than AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, and Charter combined.
So, I guess one of the issues, well, let me just say, we have a lot of credit investors that listen to this show, watch the show on YouTube. Your balance sheet, I'm just looking at some rough numbers. I'm not a credit analyst, just a little less than 4 times leverage, I guess, on your balance sheet?
2.7.
Oh, 2.7. Okay, so is that where you want to be? Do you need to get lower? Where do you want to go there?
Well, with the interest rate environment as it is, we announced earlier this quarter that we see our way to 2.5 next year.
Okay.
And so we're going to de-lever a little faster than we had previously communicated to Wall Street because of the cost of capital. And I think that was really well received. We continue to see upgrades over time. So we're one of the only big issuers in the country that's actually seeing a declining cost of capital, because 2 years ago we were not an investment grade issuer. Today we are. Then we moved to corporate family. And so as we get more and more improvement in our profile, we're actually seeing some benefits there.
All right, Mike, we got about 30 seconds left here. Subscriber growth, pricing growth. What else do you manage to manage your top line?
It's mostly about share taking, but it's also about these adjacent markets like broadband, which is a no-kidding big business for us now with 4.2 million subscribers.
All right. Mike, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes
Great
of joining
to be
us
here
at Bloomberg Radio. Michael Sievert, he is the president and COO of T-Mobile. Look, TMUS is the CEO. I'm sorry. TMUS is a ticker, although on the trading desk we just said T-Mo. I'm buying T-Mo.
Yeah.
Yeah, selling telephone, buying T-Mo, or all that kind of stuff. So
I still think of VoiceStream.
You think of VoiceStream?
Yeah.
You go way back. Yeah, we are. Yeah, when you come into this studio, you get some old school. Anyway, the stock is pretty much steady here to date. Looking at it, get the Bloomberg quote up there. T-Mobile year to date, kind of flat on the stock. It's got $163 billion market cap stock, but again, as I said, putting up on the last 5 years, it compares very, very well to the S&P, outperforming the S&P. That I'm sure as Mike prefers to look at it relative to his peers at AT&T, Verizon, significantly outperforming those stocks as well. S&P 500 off 1%. The Dow kind of flattish on the day. NASDAQ taking it on in chin. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Why were the economists so wrong? What are the economists getting wrong?
Isn't this a slam dunk time to buy U.S. Treasuries?
Soft landing, hard landing, no landing. I don't know.
True. What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
We're going to be in an environment with higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to talk to Jack Devine. You know him. He is our spy go-to guy. He's CIA and all that kind of stuff. So we want to get his sense of what's happening over there in Israel.
Absolutely. I mean, so we heard the Wall Street Journal scoop about a half hour ago that Israel has agreed to delay its attack in Gaza so that the U.S. could move around missile batteries and better defend its own positions there.
Yeah.
And to me, that brings up a question. How imminent is this?
Yeah, it really is. And so Jack Devine will give us some color there. 32-year veteran at the Central Intelligence Agency. That's pretty tough. Plus, we're also going to check in with Joe Matthew. He's host of Bloomberg Radio's Sound On and Bloomberg Television's Balance of Power. He's our go-to guy for what's happening down in D.C. I don't know if we have a speaker or not. I'm all confused there, but he'll give us the latest there. But
if we do have a speaker,
yeah,
is it a speaker who believes that the democratic process worked out in 2020?
I
and
don't
that President Biden was legally elected?
I don't think this is the guy, but I'm not sure. Well, we'll check it out with Joe. But let's kick everything off with Charlie Pellet.
All right, thank you very much. Certainly a lot of moving parts to today's trading, with traders keeping an eye on the latest geopolitical developments. They're also grappling with a batch of corporate earnings. Case in point, Alphabet down now by 9.4%. Microsoft after earnings up by 2.6%. Here's where we stand. S&P down 42, drop there of 1%. Right now we've got the Dow up 34, higher by 0.1%. NASDAQ down 232, a decline there of just about 1.8%. 10-year yield 4.91% with a 2-year 5.09%. Gold up $9.50 the ounce to $19.80, up by about 0.5%. Bitcoin up another 3.7%, now at 34,890 on Bitcoin. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, 84.06 a barrel, and gold again up $9 the ounce to $19.80, up by about 0.5%. Bottom line, mixed markets right now. Dow higher, but the S&P down by 1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. Again, Matt, as Matt just mentioned, the Wall Street Journal breaking the story just earlier this morning that Israel has decided to delay its invasion of Gaza, presumably to allow the U.S. to move some additional missile systems into the region. We want to check in with somebody who kind of knows how this stuff is done, and that's Jack Devine. Jack is the president and founding partner of the Arkin Group. Before that, he spent 32 years at the Central Intelligence Agency all over the world, so he knows how this stuff gets done. Jack, what do you make of the news here today that it appears that Israel is going to delay, we don't know for how long, its invasion of Gaza?
I think we have a balancing task here. I think on one side, the faster you go in, the quicker you suppress Hamas, the better it is in terms of controlling them before they get dug in deeper. At the same time, you have the world looking at the situation, and you're bound to feel pressures coming at you. And then the really balancing problem is the hostages. And I think everyone is trying to do the best they can to maximize the number of hostages, and hopefully all. And I think that's the balancing trick. The military part being getting it done quickly and so on, and getting the hostages. So I think there's a balancing act. I don't think it can go on too much longer, though. I think that this delay is probably one that the Israelis felt was within their limits, but I don't know how long they can hold off.
They do seem to be losing momentum. I thought they were going to go into Gaza. You know, it was reportedly imminent 2 weeks ago. I get that they want to soften targets inside there. That's the terminology they use. But it seems like world leader after world leader has flown over to Israel to try and get them to put this off, to try and get them to, you know, breathe in, breathe out, and think about what's about to happen. Is it possible that that tactic works and we don't get a ground invasion in Gaza, or do you think that's a foregone conclusion?
I don't think the Israeli political life can withstand that. In other words, you had such a massacre impacting not just the immediate victims, but their relatives and the spirit of the country. I think if you walk away without Hamas being destroyed, I think there'll be huge dissatisfaction. I don't think it's in Netanyahu's character to settle for that. But I do think they're trying to be smart to make sure they've done everything they can to try and deal with the world opinion and pressure about the situation. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's inconceivable to me that you have a ceasefire. So
to me, the hostages,
I think the bullet has to be bitten. And I do believe there were some natural delays. I mean, they weren't in position. I mean, they were not really set up to do the invasion. So that takes a little time, and then you have to soften it up. But I think this is from where I sit. It looks to me like they're well within reach of going in and doing what they have to do.
To me, the hostages raise an interesting question.
Delays work against them.
Yeah, I wonder what you think about, you know, Erdogan today said he doesn't think Hamas is a terrorist group, but it's difficult to look at what they did on October 7th and not call that terrorism. We do not, at least as a public policy, negotiate with terrorists. So what's happening here?
Well, you have Erdogan, but you have many other leaders. You have the head of the UN. I mean, it's very disappointing. I mean, if we can't distinguish between massacres and slaughtering and trying to defend your country, I mean, and our universities, it's to me, it's shocking. And I think we have to, when this is done, reevaluate where we stand. I do think there's an opportunity. There is a silver lining if the Israelis succeed, as I think, which will be to get rid of Hamas. I mean, it'll spring up again, but there'll be a breathing period to look at some longer lasting peace arrangement. But right now, it's stunning to see.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get there, to be honest. It's, and I just feel you must have been out of touch and didn't watch any news or listen to Bloomberg when that massacre took place. I mean, it was savagery.
Jack, what role do you believe currently the United States military and intelligence is playing as we speak?
I mean, Israel's been a long-time ally, certainly our principal ally in the Middle East. I suspect we're doing everything we can on the intelligence front to assist. I also think militarily, I don't see boots on the ground. I do think there are risks having the fleet there, but I think it's the right move. And I think we're showing strength so that we're really trying to contain the Iranians rather than dealing with anything related directly to Hamas and Gaza. The Israelis will take care of that.
All right, Jack, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you jumping on here last minute. Jack Devine, he's a president and founding partner of the Arkin Group, a 32-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency. We always like getting a few minutes of Jack's time when there are breaking geopolitical events, and there seem to be plenty of those these days. All right, let's turn our attention back to Washington, D.C. I understand we soon will have a vote within the House to perhaps try to elect a Speaker of the House. Let's check in with our go-to person in Washington, Joe Matthew. He is host of Bloomberg Radio's Sound On and Bloomberg Television's Balance of Power. Joe, any reason to have any greater or less optimism today with the proposed speaker?
Kind of asking the same question myself here, Paul. It does seem like a lot has changed in the last 24 hours, and it might just be the capitulation that we were waiting for. You think about this as, you know, a markets guy. Like, you wonder where we're going to bottom here. When is this thing actually going to stop? And it might have actually, we might have actually gotten to that point. As we've been reporting, we do have a nominee here in the number 4th position, which is pretty remarkable. If you're with us on YouTube, you see Congressman Johnson, and it looks like he might get the votes. It's very difficult to tell because not everyone was in the Republican conference meeting last evening. There were about 20 lawmakers not present. So a little bit of this is going to be ad-libbing and learning in real time. But it looks like he might actually have the support, not necessarily on the first round, but there's such a need to get this done that Republicans might have found their man.
Is it possible? I mean, is it still like a 4 or 5 congressman difference that's going to make or break this election? Yep. And does that mean that the Republicans believe that no one in their entire caucus is worried about an election denier, someone who either believes that the election was rigged because he's into conspiracy theories, or is willing to trash the American democracy for political benefit?
You're asking the right questions. I'm not sure that's going to matter here. The reporter, Rachel Scott from ABC, who asked about that in the briefing last night that Mike Johnson and was surrounded by the dozens of members of the caucus, they tried to crowd the room in a show of unity. That reporter was booed, and a congresswoman named Virginia Fox yelled, "Shut up," when she asked about trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. This is a very real thing. Congressman Johnson actually wrote the amicus brief in the Texas lawsuit that aimed to send the results to the Supreme Court. But look, Jim Jordan was also part of the conspiracy on January 6th, and that didn't seem to bother a lot of members of the Republican conference. It's a big reason, however, why Democrats say they won't take any part in this process.
So Joe, just to be clear, is the expectation now that Mr. Johnson may, in fact, get the votes to become Speaker?
Yeah, that really is what we're hearing. I'm not telling you it's going to happen or how many rounds it will take. But we thought yesterday that there was no member who could get this done, and by Friday we'd be having the same conversation. And it does feel like the conference, is coalescing around this individual. They just don't see another option, and they have a real allergy to the idea of empowering Patrick McHenry as temporary Speaker. So there seems to be a feeling today that this might be as good as it gets.
And is that feeling, I mean, the only thing that I can see that's transpired is President Trump has weighed in heavily in his support. Yes. Is that the change between today and yesterday?
It's not hurting. That helped to sink Tom Emmer as a candidate just yesterday when Donald Trump came out moments after he got the nomination, called him a globalist rhino, and all of a sudden he withdrew. We're not going to have that problem now, so this does give those who are concerned about Donald Trump's input here cover to vote for Congressman Johnson. He's on the House floor right now, by the way, shaking hands, talking to Matt Gaetz, who apparently is on board here, gave him the back slap when he arrived. So apparently that cover from Donald Trump brings over some of the crazy eights, as Kevin McCarthy called him. So look, this is looking better for Congressman Johnson than it has anyone else so far.
McCarthy, is he behind Johnson?
Yes. Yeah, he's going to come behind pretty much anybody who seems to have some momentum. As far as McCarthy
no matter what that
concerned,
person's beliefs or voting record, legislation record, he doesn't care. Literally, he'll vote for anybody then.
Jim Jordan never brought a bill to the floor in his career, so no, I'm not sure he does care about that. And he did endorse Jim Jordan. Look, I still think that it's in the back of his head that he still might get the gavel back, but my view on that is getting less popular as we go. He's got the bona fides that he needs in terms of the endorsements. Let's see if the rank and file show up for him.
Yeah, Joe, that kind of would then just bring in the flip side of my earlier question. Does that, if he were to be elected Speaker, does that imply or does that the more centrist Republicans have just given up?
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Capitulation might be another. I'm just not sure they see another option at this point. Look, we've been through 4 now. And if Kevin McCarthy can't keep the job, Steve Scalise can't get it, and Tom Emmer can't get it, we're talking about majority leader, majority whip. we're sort of out of options here when it comes to senior leadership. And that would be pretty amazing. This would be the first time that somebody not from senior leadership became speaker in 140 years, which makes us wonder exactly how this effort to govern might go. He could be in the same lot as Kevin McCarthy as well. And we're doing this again in a few months, so stay tuned.
Wow. All right, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Joe Matthew, radio and TV host, Bloomberg Sound On, Bloomberg Television's Balance of Power. Appreciate getting a few minutes of his time. That looks, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but it kind of would just imply again that I guess the more mainstream Republicans have just said, you know,
they
enough.
give up. They give up. They're like, look, the only alternative is working across the aisle for a bipartisan candidate.
Yep.
And I guess even the mainstream sort of center-right Republicans are saying, we would rather have somebody so far out on the spectrum that he doesn't even believe in American democracy than work with Democrats.
Yep, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of where the party is at the moment. And then the question will be, if that is in fact the leadership and kind of where they're leaning, what can get done legislatively, you know, over the next term or two? And then that, of course, leads into the election next year.
Well, maybe very little can get done legislatively, which...
Well, we kind of have to keep the government open, don't we, and funded. That's important. And that's November, mid-November, 17th. That seems to be important to get done. And that will presumably require some bipartisan work there.
Maybe they do just the bare minimum, you know, just kick the can down the road every once in a while. And because gridlock is good, that's what I was raised to believe in terms of markets, right?
Right.
So for the equity market, at least, they think gridlock is good.
Yep, very good. All right, so now let me go back to the auto strike. We still have no resolution. You know, we had Joel Levington from Bloomberg Intelligence saying from a balance sheet perspective, they're okay. The companies are going to be okay. I think the big issue, I mean, if I'm an auto worker, I need to have some, I don't know where these jobs are going. I don't know if they're still going to be here as we make this evolution.
Right, that's one part of it for sure, because people who work in engine and transmissions, there are plentiful right now. And in the EV future, it seems, from what I can see, that there will be fewer bodies needed on the factory floor. Now, Mary Barra seems to believe that they're going to need just as many people to build EVs as they will to build ICE products, and she is an engineer by trade.
Yes.
So she is smarter than me on so many different levels that I wouldn't want to argue with her.
Well, here's my hot take, which has absolutely zero value, but I'll offer it up anyway. I don't think the demand for EVs is going to be nearly as strong as maybe some of the folks think.
It doesn't look that way right now, does it? With all the price cutting that's having to happen in order, plus the incentives that you get both federally and state in order to get people to buy these vehicles. Now, they are more expensive, so that's one of the problems they have.
I come from it from a political perspective. I think this is going to become a political football like everything else has become.
Too late.
No, I don't think it is. I don't hear anything out there.
Oh, I mean, I spend a lot of time on the auto forums.
Yeah, but those, that's a little dicey. I just think the average thing's like, I'm not doing this electric thing. You know, my gas.
Look, there's nothing against EVs. If you have a charger network that's strong.
Yeah, all right.
Then it'll be fine, right? Because they perform really well.
I like going to a gas station and smelling gas. That's kind of the gay thing.
You and I are going to die soon.
Let's get some company news with Lisa Mateo.
I'm with you there, though. It's weird, I know.
Jersey girls don't pump gas, though,
we
Lisa.
We do not pump gas. That's the one perk we get. Good morning, guys. Well, after 2 periods of declines, Snap returned to revenue growth in the third quarter. Now, Bloomberg's Simone Foxman says there's been a few mixed messages.
The financials were pretty positive. They returned to revenue growth in the third quarter following 2 periods of declines, a net loss that came in lighter than anticipated. But the company also saying that it actually could be hurt by the impact of the war in Israel and Gaza. Brands slowing their advertising campaigns, putting them on pause since the start of the war. And the company says that could continue into the fourth quarter, making the outlook for that quarter very difficult to determine.
Snap right now down about 1.5%. T-Mobile third quarter earnings jumped after adding new subscribers. The company added 850,000 postpaid phone connections, topping expectations and outpacing rivals AT&T and Verizon. Now, revenue did miss. T-Mobile's shares right now down just a fraction. Apple TV customers can expect a change. Bloomberg's Gina Cervetti explains.
Sources tell Bloomberg News that Apple will redesign its TV app in a step toward consolidating its various video offerings later this year. Apple is preparing a new version of the app for release around December.
Now, Apple shares down almost 1%. Meanwhile, Bloomberg has learned that Apple has raised the price of its Apple TV Plus, arcade gaming, and News Plus subscription services. And that means the company's Apple One services bundle, yep, that's going up too. And Qualcomm says its new laptop processor can outperform rival products from Intel and Apple. The company says its new Snapdragon X is as much as twice as fast as similar 12.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow just turning positive once again, up now by 5 points. Little change. That perhaps is the key takeaway here with the S&P down now by 44 points. We're looking at a drop there of 1%. NASDAQ now down by 241 points. For the NASDAQ Composite Index, we're looking at a loss right now of 1.8%. Wall Street is grappling with a batch of corporate earnings amid heightened Treasury volatility. Traders are also keeping an eye on the latest geopolitical developments. 10-year yield at 4.91% with a 2-year 5.09%. Spot gold up $10 the ounce to $19.81, up by about 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.8%, $84.35 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. T-Mobile out with profit that beat estimates. The shares are higher now. T-Mobile looking at a gain of just about 0.2%, lifted by better than expected mobile customer gains. Mike Sievert is the CEO of T-Mobile, and right here on Bloomberg Markets, he talked about the progress that the company has made since its acquisition of Sprint in 2020.
So it was a marriage that allowed us to put our heads down and go from dead last in the 4G LTE era to first and best in the 5G era. Today, as we speak, we have more landmass covered with ultra-capacity 5G, twice as much as our next nearest competitor. And that really shows the leadership that we have now, and that's one of the things that contributing to all the share gain.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. After the bell today, we'll be hearing from Meta Platforms, stock down 2.2%. Also after the bell, IBM down now by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pella, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, streaming live as well on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. All right, we've been talking about rates a lot over the last several weeks. How about this rate? The bank rate, 30-year fixed mortgage, 8.04%. Are you kidding me? Crazy. I feel like a rock star now with my 6% mortgage I got earlier in the year. We also had new home sales today. They don't care about the rates, up 12.3%. After a decline last month of 8.2%, so kind of all over the place. Let's figure out what's happening in the residential real estate market. We do that with Kate Kaminsky. She's the COO of Walton Global. Kate, give us just kind of an overview here. It seems like with mortgage rates this high, who can afford to buy a house these days?
Well, thanks for having me on, gentlemen. Excited to be joining you here and talking about this today. That really is the question. Who can afford to get into homes with rates at where they're at, up 5 basis points from a week ago, and we don't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. But I think the stats that you just referenced, the 12.3% that we're seeing up in September, we're really bullish on new home sales and production right now. You're seeing new home builders that represent about 35 to 40% of today's new home sales, which is up from 15 to 18% before. And we're attributing that primarily to these new home builders very aggressively buying down mortgages for these buyers. The typical consumer is they feel that 5% is about the average mortgage rate that they should be paying. And these new home builders are putting in programs whereby they're getting those new buyers down from 8% to 5% through different mechanisms of rate buy downs.
So how does this work out, Kate? I mean, what do you do at Walton Global, and what is your expectation for Q4 and 2024?
Yeah, so we're a global real estate investment and asset management firm, and we specialize in land. We're looking to buy land that's in the path of growth that is primarily intended for sale to new home builders. And so we're a pretty critical part of the supply chain, we believe, in the new home building space, because we're selling to these builders who are really focused on that first-time home buyer. And so Walton creates pretty creative financing mechanisms, off-balance sheet financing mechanisms for these home builders who are looking for ways to keep as much cash on hand, keep their margins high so that they can do things like these rate buy down programs and deploy their excess capital, which these home builders have a lot of that right now. They've been waiting for this opportunity to expand their market share.
But
so, like I said,
sorry, forgive me because I don't understand the ins and outs of this business so well, but these new home builders are subsidizing mortgages for buyers because rates are too high. And you are subsidizing the loans to these new home builders to get your land because the rates are so high. Like at some point, the buck's got to stop, right?
Well, we think that it's going to continue on. We think we have a few more years of this. And
I just mean somebody at the end of the day has got to pay for it, right? So, you can't continue to find creative financing solutions. Like at some point, it's got to get paid for. So how does that all? It's like a house of cards.
Yep. Well, we're definitely seeing the increased price of resale homes, which is why, again, we're focused on that new home build market. I was just traveling in Florida last week, and there are still places where we have new communities that are going up, being built by the public builders, and there's homes in there selling for $200,000 and under in some instances. And so I think that drive to affordability is critical. We need to be focusing on that right across the country. so that we're matching the home buyer with what they're earning and what they can afford. And so, we've got a real lockup in the resale market right now because we've continued to see the value of those homes increase, and that's just not sustainable. I completely agree with you. But so that's why we continue to think that the new home building space is going to be where these buyers are fleeing to. We have a fundamental undersupply of homes in this country. Depending on what economist you speak to, it's between 2 and 6 million homes that we need to build because of the underbuilding that was occurring after the Great Recession. And so, these new home builders are where the affordability lies.
So when you're out there these days, what's the cost of land that you guys are looking at? What's the deal? What's the deals you're looking at today versus maybe 4 or 5 years ago in terms of acquiring land?
Yeah, that really is specific to every market that we're in. We are looking for land that has is in a development friendly municipality or county. That continues to be one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing across the country as well. These areas where growth is coming, not wanting to accept this growth and provide the necessary approvals. But that's where the opportunity lies. And so we focus on areas where there's access to infrastructure, and we've really got pro-growth governments in and around the area that are going to help get these off the ground. So, there's not a specific price per acre that we're focusing on because that varies by state and per region. But we really focus here at Walton in the Sun Belt, the southern smile of the U.S. because of those major market trends that we follow: job growth, population growth, net domestic migration. It's a pretty simple equation, and that has been our model for the last 45 years that we've been doing this.
Who do you compete against? Because we've heard this same strategy on the real estate side from basically everybody in the home building food chain. So it's got to be competitive when a parcel of property comes up in suburban Dallas or suburban Austin or suburban Tampa. I got to think 10 of the smartest and most well-capitalized people are in there trying to get that land. How competitive is your market?
So it's definitely a competitive marketplace, but where I would say Walton's niche is that we're buying land that's a little bit earlier in the cycle. Most of your builders today, because of what happened after the Great Recession and the long duration that it took for everything to normalize, they all have pressures from Wall Street to keep land off their balance sheets. And so they're looking for land that they can be building and selling homes within 24 months. And so they're compressed on what assets they can actually purchase. And even many of the land bankers and groups that they work with, they have a pretty short time horizon for when that land needs to be cash flowing, aka homes being built and sold to third parties. Where Walton comes into play is we have a little bit more patient capital, not too patient, but a little bit more, where we'll buy land that is a little bit earlier in the cycle, and we'll hold it while that home builder is doing the entitlement work, getting it ready to literally stick a shovel in the ground. And that's the time when we'll transfer the land to them. So it's pretty unique in that space, and where we find the opportunities.
All right, Kate, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Again, talking about some of that commercial real estate development. Kate Kaminsky, COO of Walton Global.
Why don't we live in the Sun Belt?
Yeah, I know. I did for a while. It's great.
I love it down there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love to go to Phoenix. I love Scottsdale.
Love
the whole
Scottsdale.
area.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, the Sun Devils had a great football team.
Not so much.
Remember Jake Plummer?
Yeah.
What happened to that guy?
I don't know.
What happened to their?
Now, when I see Arizona,
in the Pac-12 now.
I see Arizona State. I think Bobby Hurley, the greatest point guard in college of all time, at Duke and Jersey City. He's now the coach of Arizona State. Let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get rolled in national news, and we'll do that with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. Diplomatic efforts are expanding in hopes of preventing the Israel-Hamas war from spreading. President Biden spoke on the phone yesterday with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern says it's one of many efforts now underway.
They do not want to see this widening and spreading. So not only did we have that phone call yesterday between President Biden and Mohammed bin Salman, but also we have Emmanuel Macron, who's leaving Israel and visiting Egypt today. We have the Austrian chancellor going to Israel. We have the Czech prime minister going to Israel. So you can see this flurry of diplomacy is not stopping.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern in Washington. Qatar's foreign minister says talks to release hostages held by Hamas are progressing well. He says breakthroughs could be imminent. The UN, meanwhile, is expressing concerns that its shelters are overwhelmed by almost 600,000 Palestinians who fled their homes in Gaza. Well, after further review, the U.S. is again saying Israel was not behind the hospital blast at a hospital in Gaza City that killed hundreds of people last week. We get more from Bloomberg's Amy Morris. The intelligence community examined videos and used geolocation techniques to trace the blast to a rocket launched inside Gaza that failed mid-flight. The Washington Post reports analysts don't have enough information to say for sure who launched it. They have examined intercepted communications of fighters affiliated with Hamas, who can be heard speculating that Palestinian fighters launched the rocket. But analysts could only conclude with low confidence that Palestinian fighters were responsible. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
The field is set for this year's World Series. The Arizona Diamondbacks will be up against the Texas Rangers. The first game is this Friday. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Matt Miller and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio in New York City. Coming up, we're going to have a simulcast with Bloomberg Television. Cristiano Amon, he is the CEO of Qualcomm. He's going to join Bloomberg Technology to discuss the company and the recent earnings. We want to talk markets here. We're going to do that right now with Lamar Villery. He's a portfolio manager at Villery & Company. That's a family-owned asset management firm down in New Orleans. Fourth generation. Really, really cool story down there. Lamar, I'd love to get, based upon the experience you have, your family has in these markets here, how do you guys view what's happening out there in both the equity and the fixed income space? It seems like rates, the interest rates market, are really driving what's happening in the equity markets. How do you guys think about it?
Yeah, no, obviously the whole market's being pulled around by kind of the whims of the Fed. The good news is we think the rate hikes are pretty much done. I think we've got one more hike coming next week, and then we don't really think there are going to be any more, and then potentially getting into a cut next summer. So I think the most of the damage is done there in terms of running up rates, so hurting the value of both the stocks and the bonds that our clients hold. So we're pretty constructive on the market. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff going on globally that leads to a lot of concerns, but we're primarily focused in the U.S. and we think the outlook is actually pretty bright.
So we're kind of getting into the heat of earnings here. What are you looking for from some of the companies that you guys own this earnings cycle?
Yeah, a lot of our companies have come out and kind of updated guidance. And generally what we're seeing is revenues about where they're expected, but margins coming in a little better. I think with the supply chain issues kind of cooled down. Some of the costs that had been surging, whether it's because of the transition, the switch to air freight and other things, some of those are getting a little bit sort of become eased. So generally, things are looking a little better from the profitability standpoint. So we're pretty positive.
I'm a big fan of the gaming industry. I'm just fascinated by the economics there. Caesars, that's one of the names that you guys have owned for a while. Talk to us about your call there on Caesars. CZR is the ticker.
Sure. So Caesars is a pure play U.S., so you're not taking any China risk or some of the other geographies where gambling it's meaningful for some of their competitors. Basically, you've got a management team that we think very highly of. Tom Reeg has kind of done this multiple times. We kind of view him as the adult in the room, very margin focused. He's, for example, I think investors have been a little frustrated that their online gaming hasn't grown as fast as some of their peers. But if you look a little further, their cost per gross ad, so every customer they add is costing them about $100. Some of their peers are closer to $1,000. So really, there's this land grab for market share that Caesars is sitting back and growing in a more, we think, a little bit more prudent manner. Yet still, we think they're going to get to $5 billion in EBITDA or cash flow in the next 3 years. So they're growing well. Vegas is on fire. I mean, it's right now, I think, investors are a little concerned about the U.S. consumer, but Vegas is packed. You've got the Super Bowl coming. You've got the F1 race coming. So there's a lot of good tailwinds. Both, the online business, while it's not growing as fast as some people had hoped, it's profitable and it's actually beating expectations. And then the bricks and mortar casino business is doing great. So we think that the outlook is bright there. There are a little bit of concerns about their leverage. They've got a decent amount of debt, but they've got some interesting properties that they're selling off, as well as, like I said, the great cash flow generation. Right. I think it's going to be just fine.
All right, Lamar, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Have to leave it there. Lamar Villery, he's a portfolio manager at Villery & Company. Again, a family-owned asset management firm, fourth generation. Just a great story down there. Great history, great experience. So we've got coming up a really interesting discussion. Cristiano Amon, he's the CEO of Qualcomm. I think about some of the chip space, the tech space, a lot going on there when you think about the telecommunications side of the business, and Qualcomm is right smack in the middle of it. So now we want to bring you an interview with Cristiano Amon, CEO of Qualcomm. He joins Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde live on Bloomberg Technology, talking about the telecommunications space. A lot of action over there, a lot of competition, a lot of investment, but Qualcomm is right there as it has been for a long time. Let's head over to that discussion right now. That's coming up in just right now.
Welcome to our Bloomberg TV and radio audience worldwide. Qualcomm is stepping up its efforts to break into the personal computer market by unveiling a new laptop processor designed to outperform rival products from Intel and Apple. Joining us to discuss the new Snapdragon X is Cristiano Amon, Qualcomm CEO, and you join us from Maui at the Snapdragon Summit, Cristiano. The question that I hear over and over again, be it from your investors or be it from the millions of Snapdragon users and fans around the world, is how is this fundamentally going to change the operation and functioning of a personal computer?
Oh, yes. That's the reason we're very excited about what we're doing. And I think the endorsement we got from Microsoft, I think the presence of Microsoft in our event as well. We have been working to build the next generation computing device for the Windows ecosystem. And it comes with where we see the convergence between the mobile and the PC. It comes at a time that users want more mobility and more performance, and the whole experience becomes an AI experience. And I think that's what we did with the Snapdragon X Elite announcement. First of all, we're incredibly proud, and especially as we've been talking, that Qualcomm is changing from a communications company to a connected processor company. We just unveiled the fastest CPU of any mobile computing device, of any laptop in the world. Fastest CPU in terms of performance. We have the device here. People could test it. That's going to allow for you to have a lot more performance for your day applications, but also to have a lot of AI on the device.
Cristiano, we were submitted dozens of questions from our audience, including Snapdragon insiders on Discord, for example. And actually, a reoccurring question was how the latest generation CPU can handle specific AI functions like Microsoft Copilot, for example, on device. Can you give us any insight there?
Absolutely. So what is interesting about what we've done with this processor, not only has the fastest CPU for your everyday tasks and gaming and all of those things, but it has a separate engine, and that is a unique differentiation from Qualcomm. It's called the NPU, and it's about allowing your AI to run pervasively and always running on the device. So the Copilot will be always running on the device to assist you with every task. And the NPU is the biggest that you can in performance you can find on the device. Just as an example, we can run large models of 13 billion parameters natively on the device. And we show that we have been partnered with all the major ecosystem investing on AI, from Microsoft to Meta to Google and many other companies, in having all of those models running natively on the device.
It's a fascinating moment in terms of competition, Cristiano, as well. It was but a couple of days ago, reports that NVIDIA is going to be challenging the space as well with its own ARM-based processors for PCs. You've got Apple, of course, showing its prowess in the area. How do you set yourself apart from what is going to be a real rush to the PC area?
I actually think the announcements that happen, especially the NVIDIA announcement, is one of the best things that could have happened for our efforts in the PC. We have been talking for a while, since we embarked on this journey with Microsoft, that the PC market is moving to an ARM-compatible, away from the x86 into an ARM-compatible instruction set. The NVIDIA announcement is the validation that that is the new market and that is the new TAM for Qualcomm. It comes at a perfect time that we have been diversifying the company and looking for new opportunities and end markets for our technology. And we had started on this journey for at least the past 3 to 4 years. I think 24 with the new Windows AI, that comes to fruition. It starts to be at the end of the 2024 material for Qualcomm. So we're really excited about that. And we look at all those announcements and endorsement that this whole PC ecosystem is moving to. And we just developed the fastest ARM CPU in the world.
We've got, well, announcement potentially as soon as next week with Apple, M3. When you've got a competitive but a validated space, as you seem to be articulating, what volumes do you anticipate in year one, for example?
Well, we're not making projections. I think we have been very careful, especially because this is a new market for us. Think of us as a new entrant. And if you look at the size of this market, I think even if we get a smaller share is a significant growth opportunity for Qualcomm. And we're excited about what we have developed. The part is competitive. And one thing we haven't mentioned about it, besides the performance, the power, which is our DNA of making very power efficient devices for battery life, is incredible. We exceeded the performance of the fastest CPU you can get from Intel for gaming, but we do it at 70% less power, as an example.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, we're joined by Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon from the Snapdragon conference in Maui. You just mentioned power. The claim is that it's about 68% less power than the comparable Intel processor. A really fair question is the price premium, though, that your latest chip has. A lot of questions from global end market users was like, well, how much am I going to have to pay over the nose to have access to a consumer electronics device that carries Snapdragon X relative to mid and lower tier smartphone or PC?
I'm going to answer that question two ways. The first one is we're going to enable with this product for you to have a thin and light laptop that you can have the performance that you would find otherwise on a high-end gaming device. So I think if anything, we're going to be democratizing technology and make that and AI running on device available to more people. And that's easy to understand given our mobile heritage. The other part of that, it's actually, we look at the Snapdragon Elite X actually as a premium Snapdragon solution, which improves dramatically our mix, and it has great financial contribution as we look at the margin of those products. So I think it's a win-win for both sides.
One thing that you guys do really well is look at Snapdragon and this kind of fan base you have. You know, everyone has raved about the H100 GPU from NVIDIA all year, but I've noticed this kind of deep Reddit forum discussion, Discord channels dedicated to Snapdragon. How much do you take into account the feedback from those community in your development of the product and what it can actually do?
A lot. I think one of the things we do well is we have been nurturing this community. By the way, both of you should be a Snapdragon insiders. You may be missing out. And we've been nurturing this community. It's growing very fast. It's over 14 million. And those are tech enthusiasts. And they really love the technology. They're advanced users. And they give us a lot of insights. And we really like that relationship.
Ultimately, I mean, I remember when we were first coming and sitting down with you a couple of years ago, it was all about supply chain issues when it came to chips and how you navigated that. Is there any sort of concern when you're thinking about unleashing these new, more powerful PC processors?
No, the supply chain, I think, crisis we had in the semiconductor industry is behind us. And we actually look at into the future as the most exciting thing now is how AI is developing on device outside the data center, and it's going to touch phones, it's going to touch PCs, it's going to touch cars, and we're looking, maybe we have an opportunity to create a whole new cycle in the phone business and generate growth in the phone business as well with AI.
Cristiano, I want to be sort of reflective for a minute. You and many of your peers have tried to bring ARM-based CPUs to PCs for a decade. And fundamentally, the personal computer has not changed for a decade. The ecosystem around x786, for example, massive. It's been tried, tested. Why now? Why is this going to be any different from what you've tried in the last 10 years?
Okay, let me bring you a different perspective, because there's a number of different vectors that are changing the PC. And by the way, I think we need to say Apple did a very good job when they developed the M series and creating a PC based on a mobile SoC architecture. And that's one of the things that we have been working to do the same and create the best possible performance next generation PC for the Windows ecosystem. But the reason this is different, first of all, I'm talking to you right now via my PC. And PC became a communication device. We took working with mobility to the next level. And then the biggest piece is the fact that AI is changing the user experience. If you think about Microsoft's doing a Copilot, even what Microsoft said about the price of the Copilot, which I actually think is inexpensive if you think about the productivity increases they can do for many enterprises, that is changing. It's going to be a different type of device, and that's what we're working on, and that's going to be a bright new feature. We're going to bring a lot of excitement and hopefully a new upgrade cycle for PCs.
Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon from Snapdragon in Maui, thank you for your time.
All right, that was Carolyn Hyde and Ed Ludlow from Bloomberg Television interviewing Cristiano Amon, CEO at Qualcomm. Qualcomm, at a conference saying that its new PC chip can outperform Apple and Intel's best. So we'll have to keep track of that competitive chip market, particularly on the gaming front. Right now, let's get a little bit of a reset here. We go to Nancy Lyons for World and National News.
Thanks, Paul. We're waiting to see if Congressman Mike Johnson will be the next Speaker of the House. The fourth-term Republican from Louisiana is the fourth nominee for the job since Kevin McCarthy was ousted October 3rd. Johnson was a key figure in pushing to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, and if he is elected Speaker and keeps his job, he could have even more power over Congress's role in certifying the results of the 2024 contest. With several members missing today, Johnson needs 215 votes to win. Former President Trump is addressing an ABC News report that his former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, has flipped in order to gain immunity in Special Counsel Jack Smith's election interference case. Trump spoke with reporters this morning before entering a New York courtroom for his civil trial.
He strongly believed the election was rigged. Now, of course, deranged Jack Smith and the prosecutors, they go after somebody for years, and they say, look, here's the story. We'll give you nothing. We'll erect a statue to you, or you're going to go to jail for 10 years for having done nothing wrong. So, a lot of people have to make that decision. Some people would never make that decision. Other people would.
Trump on social media has called Meadows a weakling and a coward to take an immunity deal. President Biden is playing host to the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, at the White House today.
The Australian got fifes, drums, and a steak dinner.
We're standing with Israel against Hamas terrorism. We're standing with Ukraine against Putin's tyranny.
Albanese noted the Ukrainian troops drive Australian armored carriers.
All Australians condemn the atrocities, terror, and pitiless brutality of Hamas. Every innocent life matters. Every effort must be made to protect civilians.
With China a major concern, the two governments will collaborate on seeking new sources of critical minerals. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
The two men will be holding a news conference later this afternoon. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Paul, and Matt, are you there today?
Yeah, Matt kind of, he comes and goes, but it's okay. He's got TV to do, so we let him out a little bit early. Nancy Lyons, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Starting to get some the results from the university endowments, and the Ivy Leagues are having a tough time. Princeton University's endowment lost 1.7% on its investments during the latest fiscal year. Its second straight negative return and the worst annual performance in the Ivy League, with most schools reporting. The culprit for the negative return was poor performance in venture capital, compounded by an attempt to hedge against that result, said Andrew Golden, president of the Princeton University Investment Company, which manages the fund. The value in the endowment declined to $34.1 billion at the end of June, the New Jersey school said Wednesday. The results at Princeton extended a string of low returns at the largest college endowments, even as the S&P jumped 18% during the same period. Many of the richest funds have been hit with falling investment values in alternative assets, such as private equity and venture capital. Endowments with less than $500 million, which typically invest more heavily in U.S. stocks, have outperformed their larger peers. That's according to Wilshire Trust Universe Comparison Service, which doesn't name individual schools. So they got some big returns on the way up when private equity and alternative investments were performing well. Now it seems like some of these large endowments are starting to feel the pain on the way down. Looking at these markets right here, the S&P 500 off 1.2%. NASDAQ is kind of where you're seeing some more pain, off 1.9%. 10-year Treasury yields, they're sitting at 4.92%. The 2 years at 5.11%, and the 30 years at 5.06%. All right, coming up, Sound On with Joe Matthew. He's down in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot going on down in Washington, D.C. They're trying to get a Speaker of the House, and we'll see how that plays out. But Joe Matthew, sound on. That starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Here we go again. Another vote for Speaker. This time the nominee says he has the votes. Where have you heard that before? Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Congressman Mike Johnson gets his turn now, the nominating speeches are happening as we speak, and then the vote will follow. We're going to find out in real time what happens here with the help of Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, and our panel today. Coming together with Lisa Camuso Miller from Reset Public Affairs, former spokesperson for the RNC, and Jim Kessler at Third Way with the view from both sides of the aisle. We're also standing by to hear from President Biden holding a bilateral news conference later this hour with the Prime Minister of Australia. So we've got a lot to talk about here, and we start, as always, on Wall Street. An update on trading from New York. Here's Charlie Brown.
All right, thank you very much, and I got plenty to talk about as well. Joe Matthew, lots of moving parts today. Corporate earnings front and center. We begin there. Last night we did hear from Alphabet. The stock now down 8.9%, certainly weighing on technology sentiment, but heading in the other direction after earnings. Microsoft up by 2.6%. We've got stocks lower amid heightened Treasury volatility. Also, traders are also keeping an eye on the latest geopolitical developments. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio for the very latest. S&P right now down 52, a drop of 1.2%. Dow Industrials down 59. That is a decline right now for the Dow Jones Industrial Average of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 264, a drop of 2%. 10-year yield 4.93% with a 2-year 5.11%. Spot gold up $6.50 the ounce to $19.77, up by about 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude back above $84 a barrel, 84.43 right now on WTI, up by about 0.8%. Qualcomm is stepping up its long-running effort to break into the PC market. It has unveiled a new laptop processor, Snapdragon X, designed to outperform rival products from Intel and Apple. Cristiano Amon is the CEO of Qualcomm. He was interviewed moments ago right here on Bloomberg Radio.
We have been working to build the next generation computing device for the Windows ecosystem. And it comes with where we see the convergence between the mobile and the PC. It comes at a time that users want more mobility and more performance, and the whole experience becomes an AI experience. And I think that's what we did with the Snapdragon X Elite announcement.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Qualcomm shares, they are trading lower today. We've got Qualcomm, part of a broader tech sell-off. Qualcomm down by 3.6%. So again, recapping, stocks lower across the board. S&P down 1.2% today. The Dow now lower by 0.2%. And important to turn out that the Dow has now turned negative for all of this year. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, giving it to us straight from New York. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where it's happening again. This is starting to feel familiar. This is the fourth round here. By the way, let's do it right. This is day 22 without a Speaker of the House. There is a chance that we end the day with a speaker, and I haven't been able to tell you that in some time here, maybe not since last January, as Congressman Mike Johnson becomes the fourth nominee, and the introductory speeches are taking place right now. This went late into the evening. It was around 11 o'clock at night that after a closed-door, secret ballot, Republican conference, he actually got the votes necessary to get this far. 128 votes. but 3 members voted present and 23 were absent. So there's still a little bit of question about what's about to happen here on the floor, though everyone we're talking with, including Laura Davison, who's going to be with us in just a moment, seems to think this is real. Mike Johnson shows up with dozens of members of the Republican conference last evening at the podium, a news briefing as it was billed. More of a victory lap, a lot of applause, but a very interesting question that we'll get to with Laura here about Mike Johnson's history with helping to overturn or attempting to overturn the 2020 election results. He wrote the amicus brief, the Texas amicus brief that aimed to send the results to the Supreme Court. And he was asked about that by an ABC News reporter last evening. Somehow got this question and listen to the response. First, you'll hear Rachel Scott ask the question, and then Mike Johnson and those surrounding him, including Lauren Boebert and Virginia Fox, respond.
Mr. Johnson, you helped lead the efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Will you
Next question.
Yes, that was Virginia Fox yelling, "Shut up," at the reporter. Shut up, she said. Very similar response to when he was asked about Israel aid. Let's bring in Laura Davison now with more. Bloomberg Politics editor has been living and breathing this. It's great to see you, and it does seem like something's happening here that hasn't happened since last January. Is he going to get this?
It does seem like it. Both conservatives, the people who were against Tom Emmer yesterday, have come out in support of him. Mike Johnson himself is quite conservative. He has Trump's backing, but also some of those moderates who, were more wary of someone like Jim Jordan, have decided to get behind Mike Johnson. So this is looking like all the factions are coming together. One reason that's possible is because Johnson just has a pretty low profile in Congress. He is a member of leadership, but he hasn't been there that long. He doesn't have quite the history that some of the other folks do, and so therefore doesn't have the enemies.
So that's the world we're in. So experience works against you because you have a whole bunch of enemies. I'm sure Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise can relate with that. Certainly Kevin McCarthy can. The Crazy Eights, as he calls them, by the way, they just finished introducing, looks like Hakeem Jeffries once again. But this is going to be done with Republicans. It was right up until the end of the day yesterday. Folks like us were asking, will you use Democrats to help you, codify a Tom Emmer? That didn't happen. Maybe empower a Patrick McHenry. And I wonder if the idea of cutting a deal with Democrats was enough to bring everyone together here in the Republican conference.
All of the sort of weird options they were looking at, working with Democrats, somehow empowering McHenry, or they were, even a suggestion of having a Jordan McCarthy, co-speakership, were really unworkable. So sort of going with, okay, here's someone who we at least know is conservative, who we know agrees with us most of the time, and let's just, cut our losses. Let's move forward. We've been messing around for 3 weeks, and let's vote.
What do you make of this 2020 stuff? He's obviously going to have to answer this a little more effectively than shut up.
Yeah, I mean, and this is really the question across the board. You see that he's really unwilling to get into any sort of policy, whether that's Ukraine aid, Israel aid, even, the only thing he has said is that he would promote a CR, a continuing resolution, that stopgap spending bill, into the new year. The very thing
that got Kevin McCarthy fired.
Exactly. And he hasn't addressed, all the other things. So this could really be an issue, once he finally gets the job. If he gets the job, then he's going to have to start answering some of these details. And remember, some of the same procedures that that dogged McCarthy could come again to bite him as well.
This is how it went when he was asked about aid for Israel. It was a very simple question. Do you support this? Because we know the supplemental request is coming from the administration. Here we go.
Do you support additional aid?
You've asked your question. You asked your question. Go away.
We're not doing policy tonight. Any other questions? Other than that, thank you for being here.
And they fell into a Mike chant there. So shut up, and you've already got your question is so far the extent of exchange with the media that this speaker nominee has had. Realizing he didn't say that, but he certainly wasn't stopping the people around him.
This is something that he's going to have to get used to. If you're a Speaker of the House, you are constantly speaking to the media. You are a constant presence. You have to lead both your party. Remember, you're third in line to the presidency, or second in line. So this is really important. And he right now he's frankly a ranking member, file of Congress. He does lead a subcommittee, but hasn't had one of those bigger profile jobs yet. Either a chairing a committee or something else where you have a big staff and a big office. So he's going to have a little bit of perhaps growing pains as he figures out, okay, what does it mean to be, a leader and have to, have these relationships with the press and have the relationships with the entire conference versus just being someone who's kind of in the middle of the pack.
Voting is now underway. We were just showing our viewers on YouTube a shot of the floor here. I wonder what this is going to look like. He's already got 19, 20 votes, no others yet. Do you have a sense? Is it even possible to gauge how many rounds this might take, or could he do it on the first?
It's very possible he could do it on the first, if not the first, maybe the second. There may be a little bit of sort of last-minute gamesmanship playing of some people voting voting present. Some, it's still unclear how many Republicans are in the building. To get to that 217 last night, there were 20-some who were absent. So this is really going to be kind of a white knuckle till the end. And remember, even if he gets 217 votes on the floor, you have to wait until they gavel the vote out because people can change their vote at the last minute.
Just to add to the drama, Laura, thank you. Great job, great reporting. I hope that you find some sleep at some point soon. Bloomberg Politics editor has been, as I mentioned, living and breathing this with our team here in Washington. Want to assemble the panel for their take on what's happening right now, and we'll keep showing you what's going on here. If you're playing along on your home game, as Laura mentioned, 217 is the target. We do understand that the full Democratic conference is in the House now, so they're not making it any easier, as would be the case if some did not show up here, to lower the threshold essentially for the majority for Mike Johnson to get this done. Our panel today, as I mentioned, includes Jim Kessler, our friend from Third Way, and Lisa Camuso-Miller, our friend from Reset Public Affairs, both with long experience on Capitol Hill. Jim, of course, a veteran of the Senate and worked with Chuck Schumer for years. Lisa Camuso-Miller from the Speaker's office was also spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. So we're going to have two different points of view here, but also find some reason in the middle with two smart people. Jim, I'll start with you and what you think might happen next here. It does appear that something really changed overnight. How do you gauge this shift in sentiment? Is this the actual complacency that everyone was talking about and waiting for?
Well, I think this is going to be decided on the first ballot, and Johnson will become the speaker. Look, he fits in some ways what the Republicans needed, which is someone who the MAGA conservatives believe is a true believer, and someone who's low profile enough that, they've been out of the MAGA wars and the culture wars that the moderates in the party can say, well, I can live with this guy. So I think he's probably the most Googled name in the world in the last 24 hours. Most people don't know who he is. And that became an advantage for him. And frankly, if you look at sort of the triumvirate that was up top, McCarthy, Scalise, Jordan, they're like three scorpions in a bowl that alternately ally with each other and try and kill each other. Those three had to go. Emmer, made the mistake of not being a Trump toady. And so this is the next guy in line, and he'll get it.
He would be the least experienced Speaker of the House in 140 years. To your point, that's how this comes down, Jim. We need someone with so little experience that no one's had a chance to make enemies with them. Is that right?
Well, you're just trying to get through the next few weeks. This has been an embarrassment for the Republican Party in general, and certainly the Republican House. I don't expect him to be a particularly noteworthy speaker. My guess is he doesn't last that long, probably through this Congress and not much longer. He's got the same problems that Kevin McCarthy has. His dear colleague that he sent out could have been the exact same dear colleague that Kevin McCarthy would have sent out about the legislative calendar. I think he's the warm body who, gets us through to the next crisis.
Okay. So he may suffer the same fate as Kevin McCarthy then, or is it essentially to the end of this session that you're looking at?
I think he doesn't suffer the same fate because the MAGA wing of the Republican Party always thought McCarthy was an actor, would say the lines, but didn't really believe the lines. That is probably true. They don't feel that way with Johnson. And in some ways, that gives him a little bit more leeway to cut deals with Democrats. We'll see.
Spending time with Jim Kessler as part of our panel today. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with the vote underway. To the extent that we can show people and bring us in on the floor, I'd love for you to hear the energy of what's going on down there. Mike Johnson has 42 votes. Hakeem Jeffries has 39. No others yet. At this point, in the last couple of instances here, Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise were stacking up no votes. So he's keeping the conference together so far here, Jim. And you seem to think this might happen on the first round, which would be quite remarkable after everything that we've seen. If that's the case, obviously we'll bring you through the gavel here and we'll watch what happens. But you could argue, Jim, pretty easily that that's just the beginning of the hard part. Becoming speaker now actually requires you to govern.
Right. And, you know, when the proceedings began and the Democrat Pete Aguilar gave the nominating speech for Hakeem Jeffries, the first thing he said was to Patrick McHenry, "I'm seeing a smile on your face for the first time in a long time." And the entire audience, Democrats and Republicans, laughed and stood up and applauded. I think this clown show for the time being is going to take a hiatus. But look, Johnson's going to face the same problems. Like there was a deal that House Republicans and Congress cut with the president and Senate Democrats on spending for the rest of the year that they want to go back on. And, you know, those, and then you've got Ukraine and Israel funding and Taiwan funding plus border funding that are all tied up. I mean, this is a lot of spending that's going to happen in the next month or so. So I buckle your seatbelts, Joe, and everybody at home.
Johnson.
Obviously, the Senate is playing a role here in a Congress that's not really functioning. Jim, I wonder your thought, the strategy from your old boss, Chuck Schumer, as well as Mitch McConnell, to start moving ahead on this supplemental request that's been put forth by the Biden administration and prepare to, quote unquote, jam the House in what might be reverse fashion if you think back to your Schoolhouse Rock. Will they succeed?
Jeffries.
Well, they do have the upper hand, and it's interesting. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell have never been more aligned on anything that I've seen in my lifetime of knowing both of them professionally and with the case of Schumer personally. The thing is, and this is where House Republicans have a disadvantage on this. If you take what the Senate is likely to pass and you put it up for a vote in the House, it would probably get 280 votes. It would pass easily with probably 90% of the Democrats supporting it and, 40% of Republicans supporting it. The problem is the 60% of Republicans who don't support it, are part of the wing of the party that decapitated Kevin McCarthy. So what they're going to have to do is figure out a way to pass this critically important supplemental package. And for Mike Johnson, to keep his job, which was the same drama that we had with Kevin McCarthy. Can he pass the bill and keep his job at the same time?
Jeffries.
We spoke with Republican Congressman Greg Murphy last evening before we had this vote to codify Mike Johnson as Speaker designate. Here's what he said about this state of capitulation, if you will.
I think Mike would do a fabulous job. I think he could get the 217. Same with Kevin Hearn. Those two individuals, I think, let's just say it's kind of insane to say, but they wouldn't have as many people against them as what we've had before. We need to be a caucus that says we start from yes and perhaps move to no rather than no and move up to yes.
Johnson.
Okay. With that said, here we are. With Mike Johnson. Jim Kessler, what do you make of the issue of 2020? He was asked about this last evening. The reporter from ABC who asked about his efforts to overturn the election results was told to shut up. When she asked another question about Israel, she was told she already got a question. At some point, he'll need to do better than that, right?
It reminds me of what my 9th grade English teacher, Miss Schmidt, used to say. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There are only stupid answers. So I think Miss Schmidt was right. That was a bad answer. And he's going to have to do better. Now, this is a tightrope that they're all walking because I think at this point, there's very few House Republicans who actually believe the election was stolen and that Donald Trump was right. They would all be turning state's evidence if they were on trial on this. So they're gonna have to come up with a better answer because look, it's not going to change on how he governs, but how he's perceived. And he is an unknown person. My expectation is that most Americans will be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. That's just the way this country is, even if they don't agree with you personally. But you just can't pretend that January 6th didn't happen and that the big steal didn't exist.
Yeah, well, it does seem to be something that Republicans are happy to forgive him for, whether it's this instance or Jim Jordan. We had a very similar issue with him as well, and we kept hearing about this being an issue in the past. Stand by, Jim. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons, who's actually on the Hill right now and outside of the House chamber, following the lawmakers in and out with a sense of what's going on here. Kayleigh is, of course, normally with us in the studio here on Sound On, and I'm wondering what you're seeing here, Kayleigh, because we still have 0 no's for Congressman Johnson. There does seem to be a feel that he's going to get this on the round that we're in, on round 1. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what Republicans were saying heading into the Capitol building, Joe. Congressman Troy Nehls of Texas said that it was a good sign that former President Trump threw his support behind Mike Johnson, that he believed he would get the votes. And Congressman Ralph Norman said it's really hard not to like Mike Johnson and that he thought he would get this on the first ballot. And of course, it's still relatively early. The ballots or the roll call is still being taken, so we don't know the final number yet. But it does seem like things are heading in that direction. We knew heading into this vote that Republicans were feeling much more optimistic, as there was no one really out vocally opposing Mike Johnson, as there were never Jordan people or never Emmer people, even never Steve Scalise people, as we have learned over the course of the last several weeks. So it seems like there is a feeling that he can get this done.
Are lawmakers making themselves available, Kayleigh? I know you position yourselves sometimes, and they'll pretend they're on the phone or they find a way to sneak away. Are Republicans staying quiet or trying to be vocal in their support of Mike Johnson?
Well, Norman, Nehls, two who I've already mentioned, did speak to reporters as they headed into the building. Congressman Bob Good did stop to speak, as well as a few others. But some who usually are more talkative than others, like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, did not speak going in to the vote today. We'll see how many of them are willing to speak coming out, and I'm sure a lot of that tenor will be determined by what the actual outcome is, whether or not Mike Johnson does actually indeed get the gavel. But you best believe, Joe, I will be chasing them once this vote is over and they're trying to descend the steps.
And I know they cannot outrun Kayleigh, which is the fun part of this whole scenario. I bet you do. All right, so let's stay in touch here, Kayleigh, because this is taking form before our eyes. 97 votes for Johnson, 0 no's. And we'll let you know when he crosses that threshold. Kayleigh, thanks for joining, as always, with a live report from Capitol Hill. I want to bring in Lisa Camuso-Miller now, Reset Public Affairs, former RNC spokesperson, but also worked for the Speaker of the House for many years and has a very good sense of how this organization is supposed to operate. It's good to see you, Lisa. Thank you for being here. Is he going to get this done on round 1?
Yes, he sure is. He is going to get it done. And I think the one thing, Joe, that I'd like to, I heard you earlier talking about the fact that folks had answered for him when he was getting questions from the media. This is a member of Congress that only has 13 people that work for him right now. The Speaker's office has almost 35 people on staff. He has no communications person with him. So it's not quite entirely fair to say that the way he responded to media was the way he will respond to media. I think that was Congresswoman Virginia Fox that was speaking the way she was.
Oh, yeah, I identified her. He let Virginia Fox tell that reporter, he let her say, shut up. He let Lauren Boebert and others boo that reporter, and he didn't say anything about it. That was my only point, Lisa. I know that he didn't utter those words, but he sure seemed to be part of the spirit.
But I do think, though, that to your point, is that he's brand new, 51 years old. He does have He's the vice chair of the conference. He has a great position on the Judiciary Committee. He does have 4 terms under his belt. So I do think that while he's not tested, he is going to be surrounded by some tremendous leadership. Well, you know, you're looking at Scalise with him, you're seeing Emmer with him. There's going to be a lot of people in the leadership on the House side that will be able to help him be successful, I think, in a way that perhaps others could not have, because they came with baggage that this new candidate, this new person that, to Jim's point, we've all Googled over the course of the last 24 hours, very well could be underestimated, but could very well serve well in this job. Don't forget, I worked then for the accidental speaker once before. So right. I've seen this play out in a different way, but it could work out well.
Lisa spent years in Denny Hastert's office. Yeah, a lot of Googling going on, to both of your points. 51 years old, Shreveport, Louisiana, son of a firefighter. I think we all got that. But the matter of 2020 is real, Lisa, and I know that's something that you take seriously as a Republican. Does he need to explain his position on January 6th?
Johnson.
I mean, I think he's going to be asked it over and over again, and he's going to have a clear answer. And I think that his answer is going to have to be even more precise now that we've had a lot of information unfolding about January 6th and unfolding about how elections were taking place in the state. So there's a lot of things that he will have to answer for. And I would hope that he would surround himself very quickly with some smart communicators and some smart policy people that can help him say the right things and do the right things. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this all unfolds, because it is something that's very important. They do still take an oath to the Constitution and not to the party.
That's right. And, you know, he's a constitutional law expert before becoming a legislator, former conservative radio host. I want to play both of you comments from Mike Johnson on January 6th. This was the day. This is the day the siege, the attack on the Capitol took place. And, of course, everyone, remember, we were all masked back then. Sounds a little bit muffled, but he's on the floor. Nancy Pelosi was in the speaker's rostrum, and he took to the floor to make the point, to make the argument, the lawmakers should object to certifying the results from the election. It's not too long, but as we vote on a potential speakership of Mike Johnson, let's listen to what he said on January 6th.
We must vote to sustain objections to states of electors submitted by states that we genuinely believe clearly violated the Constitution in the presidential election of 2020. This is the threshold legal question before us, and it's an issue before us for the state of Arizona. We got to repeat this for emphasis, because a lot of people seem to be confused. Because judges and not the state legislature changed the rules of the election, Arizona clearly violated the plain language of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution in its selection of presidential electors.
He went on from there, but that's the argument, Lisa. Will he regret those words?
Johnson.
In a previous life, I would say yes, Joe, but it's really hard to know now. It seems like this was actually a part of the litmus test for who was going to become the speaker. So while I think that we have more information now than we did back then when he stood at the speaker's rostrum and said those things, it will be interesting to see if he now takes a different tone and a different tack. And I'm not sure that he will.
Landsman.
There was some hope among Democrats, I felt like, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that Tom Emmer might actually close the deal yesterday because he voted to certify the election. The Democrats could say, hey, we can work with somebody who is not an election denier. How worried are Democrats potentially about this option, or is this just going to be water under the bridge?
I think most Democrats thought Tom Emmer was a sacrificial lamb to get to somebody else, and that he would be a reasonable choice, but you couldn't be where he was and you knew Trump was going to come and say everything. So I don't think the Tom Emmer bandwagon was very long or very deep. I do think for Johnson, he needs to say that Joe Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. That is critically important for him to say that and say it clearly. And then on the January 6th question, on what he said on the House floor, he needs to say the courts looked at those questions and made their decisions, and and I stand by what the courts said. That's where he needs to go on this. His comments on January 6th were close to disgraceful, but that's how he could clean it up at this point.
Lofgren.
We now have 127 votes for Johnson, 0 no votes. This does appear to be coming to form here and could be done in pretty close time here. Lisa will know whether he has the votes required to get this done. 217 is what we're aiming for if you're playing along in your home game. And I'll remind everyone that we're also waiting to hear from President Biden, who is scheduled to deliver a bilateral news conference to the Prime Minister of Israel 15 minutes ago in the Rose Garden. They do not appear anywhere near close to doing that. So we'll let you know when he comes out, because we need to talk to the panel as well about what's happening in the geopolitical world. We've been so focused on everything on the House floor that we need to remember, obviously, the situation in Israel, the situation in Ukraine, and of course, today, the conversation about China with the Prime Minister of Australia in town here for a state dinner that will be preceded by a bilateral news conference whenever they do emerge from their meeting in the Oval Office. Our panel today, Lisa Camuso-Miller and Jim Kessler, as we watch and listen to the vote live on the House floor that will bring what apparently will be our next Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson is looking to be in quite good shape right now, 134 yeses and 0 noes. And Jeffries, of course, keeping the Democratic caucus together here. How well will Mike Johnson work with Hakeem Jeffries if this is made official, Lisa?
Well, I'd like to think that he'd work with him well, but, you know, it seems like he's been vaulted by members that are actually not in favor of working in a bipartisan way. So I suspect that it means that he's going to have to find a way to thread the needle, because he's going to have some wins very early on, or he's going to suffer a similar fate. As Jim said, unless he finds a way to be successful legislatively, he may also be a very short-term speaker.
What's the strategy for Hakeem Jeffries then, Jim Kessler? He's going to be on the phone if this happens with a Speaker Johnson as soon as this is made official. How do they get off on the right foot?
That's a good question. And I did have a conversation this morning with a Democratic member of the House. I said, tell me what you know about Mike Johnson. He said he's very conservative, but he's a reasonable individual. He's someone that you can talk to. And, you know, I do not know what type of relationship Hakeem Jeffries has with Mike Johnson. But I know that Hakeem Jeffries is a very open person. He's very approachable.
Menendez.
This spending issue and what to do on the supplemental and Ukraine, like, this is going to come to a head very, very quickly. And, you know, what Hakeem Jeffries wanted for Democrats was, if a bill has majority support and a lot of bipartisan support, bring it to the floor. I think that's still what he's going to try and, I don't know if demand is the right word, but suggest to the new Speaker, Johnson. But that's probably what he'll try and do.
Just to correct something I mentioned earlier, the actual House attendance today came in at 429. That means it is 215 for Johnson to win. So he just got a slightly easier ride here than some of his predecessors who've gone through this over the last couple of weeks. We're going to get, obviously, a vote tally for you here in a moment. Before we do that, Lisa, what's the first order of business for Mike Johnson if he is made Speaker? Is it dealing with this supplemental budget request for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and the border?
I think there's a lot of work to get done. I mean, we've been at this for 4 weeks. We haven't had a speaker. So I think that the list is very long. Yes, those are the first on the list of the firsts, but also, too, there has to be funding for the government. I mean, we're looking at 27 days, 26 days until the government shuts down. So that's obviously a big priority as well. And whether or not a CR is the approach, I know I heard you say earlier that that was something that he said that he would consider. But that also, too, was a slippery slope, and it was what ultimately was the downfall for Kevin McCarthy. So he's got a very narrow needle to thread. He also has a very small staff. So how does he combat that with a small amount of staff that's around him? He's going to have to be hiring and bringing people on. This is an incredibly high hill to get over, and he's going to have to move very quickly.
Lisa Camuso-Miller and Jim Kessler, fascinating as always as we walk through this together, the first draft of history, with an eye as well on the Rose Garden here. We are standing by to hear from President Biden and the Prime Minister of Australia, and folks are being seated in the Rose Garden. It's a beautiful day in Washington. We'll bring you to the Rose Garden for those remarks once they get started. The Q&A should be fascinating today with what's happening on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue and on the other side of the world. 158 yes votes for Johnson, still no votes. He's on track to become the next Speaker of the House. We'll be talking about it with Lisa and Jim going forward. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
Ocasio-Cortez. Jeffries. Ogles. Johnson. Omar.
As we continue from
Jeffries.
Washington, D.C., who
Owens.
needs breaks or commercials? We have Lisa
Johnson.
and Jim for crying out loud. When this actually happens, Lisa, we still have 0 no votes.
Palmer.
This floor is going to go wild, right?
Johnson.
Oh,
At
I
least
think
half
so.
of it.
Panetta.
I think there's a lot of unsung heroes there, but yes, the members too have reason to celebrate. As you mentioned earlier, with your team that's been on the ground there at the Capitol and all the members of the media and the staff that have all been there. I think there's going to be a gigantic sigh of relief, but almost like I just said, I mean, there's no time to waste, no time to hesitate. They've got to get moving. And so, yeah, there's going to be a huge eruption and applause. I'm sure the Democrats will be concerned.
Jim, do Democrats sit on their hands? Or is there a sense of relief when this is finally done?
I think they'll applaud. And there's a sense of relief. And, you know, one of the things we haven't talked about, and it's something I really don't know, is, you know, Kevin McCarthy was saddled with,
Peltola.
you know, an easy to achieve motion to vacate. And what we don't know here, maybe Lisa knows, is
Jeffries.
have those rules changed? Will it take just one member, one Matt Gaetz, to come up and say, okay, I don't like what Mike Johnson just did. I want to do another motion to vacate. Because if it goes back to sort of the normal way it was done, where you need maybe the majority of the House or at least 50 members, that gives Johnson a lot of latitude to cut deals. So that's one of the details going forward that I'm really curious to know, because as you heard me say before, as Speaker, you can be Vito Corleone or Michael Corleone, but you can't be Fredo Corleone. Well, if the motion to vacate is 1 or 5 or 10, you're Fredo Corleone. And Johnson will need room to maneuver in divided government. So we'll see what we can find out.
Don't make me pull out the Godfather theme and do the 5 families thing. I know people are getting tired of that. Maybe not Lisa. I think Lisa gets it. You know, what do you think of the motion to vacate, Lisa? Is that a deal breaker for him? Is it something he'll need to live with?
Well, I don't know that they've decided what to do about that. I mean, I'm sure it's a deal breaker, but I do think I think Jim's point is very good. I mean, how is it that you can operate on a razor's edge all day long with as small of a majority as they have, with a motion to vacate with just one? At any point, anyone can be angry with you at any time and operate and you know, put that into play. So no, I think that's got to be something that gets adjusted, but I don't necessarily know that gets adjusted for Johnson if he becomes Speaker.
Lisa Camuso-Miller and Jim Kessler, as we wait for the magic moment here on the House floor. You know, Jim, we kept hearing from analysts here on Bloomberg, and I know we take a slightly different perspective than a lot of news networks, that this is market negative. I know that you're not coming from the investor standpoint, but if this actually gets done today, is this relief as well for Wall Street, just to have a functioning government? Maybe it relaxes the bond markets a little bit, gives people a bit of an easier time sleeping tonight?
Johnson.
Probably does. I mean, I've talked to some of the investment community that's bewildered about what's happening in Washington, and this dysfunction feels like it's been baked in for quite a while. So there might be some temporary relief there. I would look at some of the other things happening in the world where there's conflagrations, and maybe that doesn't make the market too happy. But, you know, we're returning to some version of normalcy, and that should help the markets.
Johnson.
I'll tell you, the lawmakers are getting a little feistier as we get closer here. Some rounds of applause for both Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Johnson over the past 10 minutes or so. As we get into the S's, we're getting close here. Johnson with 180 votes and 0 no votes. Lisa, this is sticking together. I know that you expected this, but are you surprised to see this hold together as well as it is on the floor?
No, I'm not terribly surprised, Joe. I also think that there's a tremendous amount of fatigue. So there's the unknown about Mike Johnson. People say that he is an affable guy and easy to get along with. He's done some good things in the House. He comes from a conservative district. He's saying all the right things for the MAGA wing of the party. And so I think that there's just a whole bunch of folks that are saying, okay, let's give this guy a shot. And so it's not unexpected. It's certainly something that I think we have to get done. I think celebrating on the floor actually looks kind of foolish, to be honest with you, because it's been 4 weeks. And I think we just need to be a little bit less celebratory. But I mean, I'm not a member of Congress, so I only know what I know.
Well, they were chanting Mike last night like they were rewriting the Constitution. So, I mean, look, at this point, after, 22 days, would not be surprised to see the celebration that may or may not be warranted. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg Sound On, and glad you joined us. You can follow along, of course, on the radio, on the satellite, and now on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Global News. We've got a view of the floor up as well as we wait for the votes to arrive here. Mike Johnson, who a lot of people learned about today for the first time, is on track to be the next Speaker of the House. And this could come at pretty much any moment here as we work our way through the alphabet. This, of course, being a roll call that's been underway for the balance of the hour as we also wait to hear from President Biden, who's going to be holding a news conference in the Rose Garden here momentarily. And it's going to be interesting to see these potentially collide, Jim. Does Joe Biden congratulate the new Speaker if he's at the podium around that time?
He absolutely will. That is very Joe Biden. He will reach out. He will extend an olive branch. He's a smart politician. He's a mature leader. He needs a partner in the House, even if that partner is sometimes an adversary and probably doesn't know Mike Johnson very well. I bet some of that Googling was happening in the White House, too. He's not a well-known person out there. And, he's going to want to try and get things done. And look, if you look at Joe Biden thus far, he's gotten a lot done bipartisan in his first few years, and he'll try and make it work with Johnson.
Our panel stays with us, Lisa and Jim, as we bring Gregory Cordy into the conversation, Bloomberg politics reporter with us here in the Washington Bureau, who's spent some time covering Capitol Hill. It's good to see you. Your thoughts on a capital and a nation Googling Mike Johnson this morning, 51 years old, Shreveport, son of a firefighter. What do we really need to know about him as a legislator, though?
Yeah, not only are we Googling him, but people on Capitol Hill are Googling him. We asked Susan Collins in the Senate this morning, is this a guy you can work with to put together a spending bill? And she says, I've never met him. I have to Google him. And so when you have the senators Googling the next Speaker of the House.
And that's considered an asset.
Well, and
because he has no enemies.
That may have been what got him over the top, right? Yeah, will have been the shortest tenured speaker in at least a century. He has very little of a record. He's sort of we talk about congressmen being either show horses or work horses. He seems to be more of a workhorse. Okay. The fact that we've never heard about him before, he's not a bomb thrower. And so this might be the guy who can cobble together enough Republican votes to become the next speaker, precisely because, as you suggest, he hasn't really made any enemies.
It looks like this is going to happen. He's got still 0 no votes. Are you impressed with how well the conference held together?
Yeah, after the chaos that we've seen over the past 3 weeks, and one candidate after another putting their name forward and not being able to cross the finish line, the fact that the Republican conference is finally unified, seemingly unanimously, behind one candidate is sort of impressive, and we have to see what that means about Mike Johnson's his leadership style and his ability to govern moving forward. forward, because it's one thing to kind of get that first speaker vote. Now he's got to shepherd this very fractious Republican conference towards a spending bill, some sort of Ukraine package, Israel package, whether those two are the same or different. And so he's going to have his plate full the moment that he bangs that gavel.
How about if he was the first after Kevin McCarthy? If he had been somehow nominated the same time, instead of Steve Scalise, would this have gone the same way? Or did they still need to exercise the demons through those other three nominees?
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothetical. And he's the first candidate to sort of emerge that was not in leadership. I'd sort of include Jim Jordan in he was not technically in leadership, but he had a high-profile committee, so he was a known quantity.
Yeah.
And so maybe it took a relative unknown to kind of come in after all that bloodletting that we've seen over the past 3 weeks.
It's pretty amazing, actually. And, obviously, there was a sense of capitulation is the word I've been using. We're just, we're done. Just give us somebody here. We got to get this thing back together.
Look, we've seen this time and again on Capitol Hill, and not with speaker fights, but we've seen it with debt limit fights. We've seen it with spending fights. We've seen it in all kinds of other legislative battles where fatigue is leadership's best friend.
Yeah.
Right? If you can keep the members locked in a room long enough, eventually they'll acquiesce. And, maybe that's what this was a late night decision last night, and now they come to the floor united.
He's at 207. We're going to do this together here, apparently. As we listen live on the floor, someone saying something that didn't go over well. I couldn't make it out. All part of the process. 208 now for Johnson, 0 no's. We'll find out what was just said for you in a moment. Let's bring the panel back in. If you can hang out, Gregory, for a moment. Absolutely. I'd love to hear from everybody about this because it looks like it's about to happen here. Lisa, he's at 210. Do you think this could have taken place around the time Steve Scalise was up for a vote, or did we have to have this exercise?
It feels like this was cathartic. Like this was an exercise that had to happen. Yeah, I tend to agree. And because also too, they had to go through the machination of all of the people that were in leadership. So let's give all the people that are in line for the job the opportunity. And this too also erases any doubt that Johnson is the guy that everybody was supporting, right? So Jim Jordan was given an opportunity. Steve Scalise was given an opportunity. Tom Emmer was given an opportunity. But Johnson ultimately is the guy who pulls it over the line because he is the guy that everybody can coalesce around.
Incredible. I called it an exorcism last evening on Balance of Power. Jim, what do you think?
I think that's a good term. And look, I think this was a necessary thing that happened, that you had to defeat Scalise, you had to defeat Jordan, and, even defeating Emmer. And, that Virginia Fox shushing down, shut up on the question. This is part of the exorcism, as you put it, of dealing with this virus of the Trump MAGA wing. And they chose someone who can appeal to that MAGA wing, but can also hide from it. And, this was a necessary thing that's happening in the House Republican caucus to try and sort of rid these old leaders, I don't mean old in age, but old in terms of their January 6th and their high profiles, and maybe turn the page on this, hopefully.
Looks like we're one vote away here if we listen to the House floor. He's at 214 because of, there we go, 215. We have a Speaker of the House, everybody. That vote needs to be codified, of course, but the applause you're hearing comes as Congressman Mike Johnson, the Republican from Louisiana, hits 215 votes, now 16 to become the next Speaker of the House, 22 days after Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker. An historic moment we wanted to share with you here on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube as the Republican conference jumps to its feet. They'll continue this, obviously. They have to finish the vote and go through the formalities. But Gregory Cordy, I guess 4 is a charm.
Yeah, we finally did it. Our long national search for a speaker is over.
You didn't say nightmare.
Well, for some of us, it was more entertaining than others, right?
Yeah,
this was fraught with intrigue. It was a soap opera from beginning to end, but it was important and with a lot at stake. With war in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, we are weeks away from a shutdown of the federal government unless we can get a spending bill. This has already been one of the least productive Congresses in history. And it just has arisen from a 3-week slumber.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
There's a lot of work on the plate to be done now that we can actually move some legislation. But yeah, this chapter of the House of Representatives is over, and you have to wonder, having gone through this once before, how much easier it might be in the future to depose a speaker. How much stability will we have with Mike Johnson as speaker? Or will, after he forces some tough votes, the same forces that ousted Kevin McCarthy come for Mike Johnson eventually?
And that may well be the case. Many have said here that the hard part starts now when you get the gavel. He's at 220 now, so even without the lower attendance here, he would have made the grade with a 217 vote. Lisa, we're going to go through the formalities, obviously, to finish this session now. But what's his next move? We understand a podium is set up outside the steps of the House. How quickly does he need to get in front of the American people and deliver a message of unity?
Well, yes, that's priority one, and it'll be interesting to see what those words are. The other thing, too, Joe, is that we can expect that we're going to see him on the Sunday shows. We're going to see him out and about. He has a lot of work to do. He has a lot of fundraising to do. This is a huge job, and a huge job that he's getting halfway through the year. So this, to me, feels like a daunting task. But he's got to get out to that podium and he's got to say some words that are encouraging and hopeful, and not just speak, by the way, to the Republicans who have elected him, but also speak to the broader American electorate.
How quickly should he share a podium with Hakeem Jeffries, Jim Kessler, or am I just being funny now?
Well, he needs to show, I concur with what Lisa said. He needs to show that he's Speaker of the entire House. And if this devolves into talking points and about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Burisma and, these conspiracy theories and just, the nonsense that you are hearing from the campaign arm, then he has missed his one chance to make a first impression. And, this is the place where he reaches towards the center, at least from the outset. And he should extend an olive branch to Hakeem Jeffries and to Joe Biden and to the leaders of the Senate.
If you're just joining us, Mike Johnson becomes the 56th Speaker of the House with a live view here on YouTube that you can join very easily by searching Bloomberg Global News. Pretty remarkable following the 3 up and 3 down that preceded this. The ouster of Kevin McCarthy and the failures of Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan and Tom Emmer to get this far. Every member of the Republican conference voting today for the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Lisa Camuso-Miller, what do you think of Jim's point? How does a Speaker Johnson deliver that message or display that posture of being Speaker for the entire House, not just half the room?
Well, it certainly was one that previous speakers have always sought out. And certainly the speaker that I worked for did that very well. And he wanted to do that, speak to all of the electorate and all of the people in the American public who have been watching this unfold. It's going to be a difficult needle to thread for this new speaker because so much of the litmus test for him to get over the hurdle was to appeal to a very broad, but also a very fringy portion of the party. And he's going to have to figure out how to say the right things and say the right things in a way that make good sense. Don't forget, Joe, he's third in line for the presidency. This is a huge job in the U.S.
It sure is. Let's listen live now as the Republican conference cheers Patrick McHenry, making this official in the speaker's rostrum. The temporary speaker still is probably looking forward to handing that gavel over.
And the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 209 votes.
There you have it.
Therefore, the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 118th Congress.
There it is. Well, at least half the room on its feet, as it's made official here. Republicans applauding following 22 days of chaos without a Speaker of the House. Patrick McHenry enjoying his final moments as the keeper of the gavel in the Speaker's rostrum.
The chair appoints the following committee to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer. The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Stefanik. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Mrs. McLean. The gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman. The gentlewoman from Washington, Mrs. Rogers. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro. The gentlewoman from Florida, Mrs. Carmack. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries. The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark. The gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liu. The gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Delbene. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar. The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Underwood. The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Jacobs. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett. And the members of the Louisiana delegation, Mr. Graves, Mr. Higgins, Ms. Letlow, Mr. Carter. The committee will retire from the chamber to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair.
Live sound from the House floor here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we spend time with our panel, Jim Kessler and Lisa Camuso Miller, and Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy with me in studio here on a day that I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, Gregory, Mike Johnson couldn't have imagined even last weekend.
That's exactly what I was going through my mind, and his world's about to change. As we've said, he's now second in line to the presidency after Vice President Kamala Harris. Yeah. He has now instantaneously got a security detail that he hasn't gotten before because he is now in that line of succession. He's going to have to be read in on some of the nation's most sensitive secrets.
Things he's never heard before.
Things he's never heard before. Things that he needs to know, frankly. He is on the Armed Services Committee, but doesn't have particular background in intelligence and foreign affairs, so he will have to get up to speed on that. And as we've been talking about, he's got to bring not only a fractured Republican conference together, but now he's got to reach out to Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader. He's got to reach out to the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Schumer in the Senate. He's part of that gang of four now.
Yes, right.
And at some point, he's got to pick up the
phone.
phone.
To the White House.
I would expect Joe Biden may already be lining up that phone call. That's one thing that we know that President Biden is very good about, is making these sort of congratulatory calls. I would expect that to happen before the afternoon is over to introduce each other. And so this is now a guy that none of us knew much about just a couple of days ago, maybe even until last night, that now is going to be part of the regular conversation in Washington, D.C.
Incredible stuff. Lisa, you mentioned having worked for the Speaker. You've got a staff of about 35. When does the hiring begin?
Almost immediately. But the good news is that there's lots of really talented people on Capitol Hill that know how this works and know how the process comes together. And the great news for the new speaker is that those people are available and willing to help it make him be successful. And so that alone gives a lot of confidence to someone like him to know that there are great, talented people on the leadership staff that already can be very supportive to him. He's going to have a seamless transition. That's the one thing I can be certain of because I know how talented those people are. They are the unsung heroes of the last 3 weeks that have been working day and night to make sure that this thing happened unsuccessfully a few times over, but it'll be interesting, and I think it'll be a positive direction for the House going forward.
Hey, Jim, Speaker Johnson is going to have to work with the leader next door. That would be your former boss, Chuck Schumer. How soon do these two get together?
I imagine it's going to happen very quickly, and there's some serious work that needs to be done. And, you know, as we remarked on earlier, Leader McConnell and Leader Schumer are in roughly the same place, same with Jeffries, same with Biden. So in some ways it's 4 against 1 here. And, you know, I think Mike Johnson's going to have to figure out a way to get his, you know, what he needs out of this, but also move these just critical spending bills and pieces of legislation forward at this remarkably critical time in the world right now.
All right. Many thanks to our panel for a marathon session here. Jim Kessler at Third Way, Lisa Camuso Miller at Reset Public Affairs. Many thanks for your insights and bringing your experience to us here. They're good friends of the program, and awfully glad that you could be with us through this. Who knew, starting an hour ago, that we would experience all of this together? Lisa and Jim, many thanks to you. And Gregory Cordy, we talk about hiring up here, setting up the office. Then there's the matter of actual business. What's going to be the priority, a continuing resolution or the supplemental funding for Israel and Ukraine?
Well, I mean, one thing even before that is the clock starts ticking right now of 48 hours on a privilege resolution to expel George Santos, one of the little thorns in the side of the past Republicans. It actually is under House rules. It's privileged, so it has to come to a vote at the time of the speaker's choosing. Yeah. Now that we have a speaker, but within the next 48 hours. And of course, you know, this was a difficult problem for Kevin McCarthy because he relied on George Santos's vote, but his is a congressman from New York who's under indictment. We all know this saga, right? This is another one of the soap operas that we've had in this year in Congress. Yep. So that's actually one of the first orders of business. Then we have a little bit of time until the middle of next month to pass a spending bill. So I would have to think that the supplemental for Israel and Ukraine takes top priority, but that's also politically tricky to do those advances one bill, as the president certainly would like, because the support for Israel is a lot more popular than support for Ukraine, and maybe Ukraine can come along for the ride. But that's one of the issues that was forcing this chaos in the Republican conference, is where these speaker candidates were on that question was a decisive factor that may have killed some of these previous speaker candidates.
Gregory, many thanks for being with us here in the clutch, as always. Gregory Cordy, great to have you, Bloomberg Politics reporter. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we bring you live to the Capitol once again here. If you're with us on YouTube, you've been seeing the House floor. Let's go outdoors now. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lines is just outside the chamber, and I suspect we'll be talking to a lot of lawmakers in just a matter of moments, but she's ours first right now. Kayleigh, what's the vibe out there now that this is official?
Well, there's definitely a sense of relief, especially for all the reporters out here with me who have been at this now for weeks, Joe, out here each and every day trying to figure out who the next Speaker of the House will be. But of course, now we know it's Mike Johnson. We actually are expecting that he may speak to press later on. They're setting up a press conference just behind me. So we'll hear from the now Speaker himself shortly. But I would imagine, and as we wait for more lawmakers to come down the steps, that there is going to be a bit of a sigh of relief that this battle is actually over. The House has a Speaker, and they can get back to the business of legislating.
Well, that's right. To your point, though, we have to go through a few stages before we get to actual governance, and that includes delivering a message. This is going to be an outdoor news conference. Kayleigh, will there be a big crowd? Will he have the conference behind him, or do we have yet to learn all of these things?
We have yet to learn exactly who's going to be in front of the mics. What I can tell you is behind the mics, there is a lot of TV cameras. There's ropes going up. There are reporters crawling all around here getting ready to ask questions of now Speaker Johnson. So I would imagine the crowd is going to be pretty big, as this is a historic day. The 56th Speaker of the House has been elected after more than 3 weeks without one. And there's going to be some pretty pressing questions for him, given, as you were just discussing, until about 24 hours ago, a lot of people didn't even know who Mike Johnson was. And now the policy he wants to push forward is really going to matter, not just for what happens here on Capitol Hill, but for the country as a whole.
This is great behind-the-scenes stuff here, especially if you're with us on YouTube. Go there now. Search Bloomberg Global News and check this out. You'll see Kayleigh outdoors. I'm also hearing producers counting down on their live shots next to you, Kaylee. And this is the way it works. You can feel free to turn the cam or tell us what's happening here, because this is the gathering, the spontaneous gathering of reporters who come out of the trees practically for an event like this.
Yeah, well, actually, just to my right, Joe, Congressman Bob Go to Virginia is huddling with a few of my colleagues here. There's other ropes going on around me, so I'm afraid I might get moved here in a second as they're trying to establish a perimeter essentially just in front of the steps to clear the way for where the podium is, where the speaker, now speaker, is assumed to be talking, and they're making gestures, so I'm just going to slowly start shifting to the side.
Please don't get arrested.
There we go.
We need you later.
I don't know if you can see the rope, but I'm glad I moved.
Yes. Look at that. This is the real stuff. You won't see that on the cable news networks. Kaylee, I suspect that staircase is going to be full of lawmakers in a bit. Do you have an ETA on the news conference?
It should be beginning shortly now that the vote has finally wrapped up. Once everything is gavelled and complete in there, we'll see how quickly around they will turn this around and actually bring them outside, and whether or not other members will be descending down the steps on their own, or if everyone's going to come out together as a conference. We're all staying tuned for that, Joe, and I apologize for the taping sound. There's a lot of cords and plugs that go into an effort like this one.
Yeah, I'll let you leave this awkward situation, Kaylee. Thank you for showing that to us. This is absolutely fascinating. Look, it's your backyard, but not everybody gets to see this every day. Just think of, these guys are going to be friends for life, these reporters who've been out there for 22 days. And Kaylee will have to introduce me at some point to everyone she's met. Thank you, Kaylee. I'll see you back here in the Bureau for Balance of Power a bit later on. And, of course, Kaylee will bring us some of the sights and sounds of what's about to happen on Capitol Hill. What a moment to have Libby Cantrell, the head of U.S. public policy at PIMCO. We've been talking about this for 22 days, and she's with us now. Your timing, as usual, is impeccable, Libby. We have a 56th Speaker of the House. I don't even know what to ask you first. Is the market sighing a bit of relief here?
I mean, at long last, right, Joe? Even I think if the markets haven't really been so focused on this. Obviously, this sort of collided with lots of other geopolitical and other issues happening, particularly in the U.S. Treasuries market. So I don't think the markets have really been paying all that much attention to it. However, as we all know, not to kind of nerd out here a little bit, but we all know that the term premium in the U.S. yield curve, Treasuries have backed up, and that sort of elusive term premium can include a lot of things, including just concerns about the governance of the United States. And so, you could argue that some of this backup in Treasury yields that we've seen is at least in part due to these concerns about just the ability of Washington to function. So I guess in that respect, you would think that, yes, the markets would likely breathe a sigh of relief. We can get into it, but there's also maybe some clarity around how we move forward on the government funding question as well.
Okay, well, what do you think about that? Because Mike Johnson says he's willing to grab that third rail called a continuing resolution, and it doesn't seem to be a problem for the conference the way it was for Kevin McCarthy. Can he actually do this?
And this is the great irony, of course, is that what got former Speaker McCarthy ousted was working with Democrats to pass that short-term stopgap funding bill. Yeah. And yet now, I guess Speaker-elect Johnson has indicated that's exactly what he will do as well in order to buy more time. Now, ironically, or maybe interestingly, he did not, Representative Johnson did not vote for that stopgap bill back in late September. But to your point, he has indicated that he does plan on passing a stopgap, just to buy more time for the House to pass those single subject appropriations bills, which I think is sort of a distinction without a difference for many people, for most people and the markets, but for many members of Congress, particularly among the House Freedom Caucus, that has been really a decisive issue for them. They have wanted to tackle appropriations and spending bills one at a time versus what is usual as this sort of minibus or omnibus, where bills are all sort of stuck together and passed at the 11th hour. So, we'll see. Again, his sort of fiscal record is one more of austerity. He has advocated for spending cuts in sort of many different respects. Again, he voted against that funding bill. He's voted against Ukraine funding several times as well. So this may not be a totally smooth glide path, but at least as of now, he is indicating that he will move forward in a way that certainly the markets will appreciate.
The President of the United States is speaking right now, along with the Prime Minister of Australia on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. They're holding a bilateral news conference that was set to start almost an hour ago at this point. Libby, do you want to hear him address any of these issues? What does the market want to hear him say about a continuing resolution and about this supplemental budget request?
Oh, about the president saying, yeah. I mean, of course, I think what the market's going to be more in tune to in terms of this meeting, with one of our closest allies, is probably around the question of China and sort of how we move forward together, with Australia on that issue. I think that the president has been very clear that he wants to avoid a government shutdown, that he will work with anybody who is in leadership to that end. Now, of course, this is a bit of an interesting dynamic because the Speaker-elect Johnson, did not vote to certify the 2020 election. So, right off that that maybe puts things on a bit of an awkward foot. But Biden is sort of a consummate legislator at heart, and I think he will work with whomever he needs to work with, to get things done. At least that's what he will say, most likely.
Mm-hmm. Spending time with Libby Cantrill, head of public policy at PIMCO, with a Speaker of the House. It is actually official now. Mike Johnson voted to be the 56th Speaker a short time ago in the House of Representatives.
The tellers agree in their tallies that the total number of votes cast is 429, of which the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana has received 220 votes. And the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 209 votes. Therefore, the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 118th Congress.
Yes, indeed. Patrick McHenry, don't be confused by what you're seeing on YouTube. That took place a short time ago, making it all official. Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, and obviously Speaker Johnson now official. Libby, how important will it be for these two, Jeffries and Johnson, to show a united front, or are we beyond that in Washington?
Well, I will just say that the Republicans seemed happy that they finally got to that threshold. I will just say, commenting on that latest clip that you played, I think that folks were exhausted and they were frustrated and they just wanted to move forward. And that's one of the reasons why, Representative Johnson, who most people don't know, many people on the Hill don't know him very well, but certainly kind of nationally, he doesn't have the same profile that certainly former Speaker McCarthy or Pelosi had. Joe, in terms of your question about how important it is for the two of them to work together, clearly, it's important to have a working, constructive relationship with folks across the aisle. Johnson doesn't really, he just hasn't been sort of in the leadership mix. So it's difficult to sort of assess at this point kind of what his approach will be working with Democrats. But as we have seen kind of painfully over the last few weeks, for many things, Republicans will need, and Speaker Johnson, or Speaker-elect Johnson will need Democrats to pass things and to advance, the entire kind of nation's agenda. So it is important. I do think there is some, poisoning of the well here, however. But, I think that they will, both sides will try to kind of move forward. I do think there is a Republicans, or there's a sense of urgency among Republicans to sort of move forward, focus on legislating, focus on kind of the business of the day, and try to put this as far in the rearview mirror as possible. And of course, we won't know what the political implications of all of this is until next November.
Do you have a sense that this is a speaker who can finish the job, or would suffer potentially the same fate as Kevin McCarthy?
I do not want to even imagine that we would be back here again. I think that they will,
I don't either.
I'm sure you don't. I mean, this is, there are other things happening in the world, and this is not something that we've all been consumed with this, sort of regrettably. But, I think folks will be incredibly reticent to use the motion to vacate again in this session of Congress. Now, Joe, as you well know, though, there's just not that much time left in this Congress, because practically in an election year, most both sides usually try to send their members home by kind of midsummer to start campaigning, and then only bring them back in the fall for kind of must-pass issues. So this sort of idea that this might be a really productive Congress of legislating, which I don't think we really had anyway, but certainly we don't have that now, just because we haven't even passed, funding bills. There's the farm bill, there's the NDAA. Then, of course, there's Ukraine and Israel funding as well. So they have a lot on their plate, and I would assume that, not much more than kind of the bare minimum gets done this Congress. The last thing I will say, which I think has been important to markets, and I'm not sure folks should feel hopeful, is energy permitting reform. There was sort of a down payment, if you remember, in the debt ceiling deal, was kind of a promise to address that later in this Congress. I think that with all of this, nobody should be hopeful that there is a big grand bargain on energy permitting reform. Now, never say never, but at least at this point, it doesn't look likely.
Well, you point out in your note to clients, winning is easy, governing is harder. And I'm sure he's about to get a sense of that if he doesn't already here, with the daunting amount of work that lies ahead. Libby, what do you make of, if anything? I don't know if this is an issue for the markets or one for you on a personal level, the comments around his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Is that something that will follow him throughout his speakership, or is that an issue that's being excised as we speak?
Yeah, so I think that the read through for the markets or the economy is just if it has political implications come 2024. And I think the way that it could, potentially, and it's really too early to say. I think as you know, Joe, a lot of times in Washington, folks are so breathless about something, how this is just going to be sort of existential, and then they just move on and no one even talks about it again. So, I'm a little bit reticent about trying to draw too many political conclusions, but the market would care if there were political consequences, this particularly if it made the 18 Republicans who are defending House districts in those districts where President Biden won, so basically purplish districts, if you will, if it makes them even more vulnerable going into 2024. And of course, as we now all painfully know, Republicans only have a 5-seat majority, and so they only need to lose 5 seats in order to lose the House. And of course, again, there's 18 districts. So I think that's kind of the tie-in. If having a very sort of more by his own admission conservative speaker who didn't vote to certify the 2020 election, does that make then these moderate Republicans from the places like New York and California even more vulnerable going into 2024? And does that make the House vulnerable to flip to Democratic control? That will be an issue for the market because, of course, the Trump tax cuts, among other fiscal issues, will be up in 2025.
Boy, just imagine the fun that we're going to have here. At least we know who we're going to be talking about for the next little bit here. Libby Cantrell, many thanks for being with us on this historic day. We have a speaker and, of course, the voice from PIMCO to back it up. It's great to see you, Libby, and thank you, as always, for joining us here on the fastest show in politics. It's certainly moving today in Washington as we balance stories on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. The breaker, of course, Mike Johnson is now Speaker Johnson, the 56th Speaker, and has the job officially following a protracted process that went through 3 nominees before we got to this one. We're going to add Wendy Benjaminson's voice from the Bureau here at Bloomberg in Washington coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The day's big story out of Washington, Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson has won the job of House Speaker after weeks of Republican acrimony. Today's vote, 220 to 209. Our coverage is continuing right here on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 index lower as it has been for much of the day, down 55 points, a drop right now of 1.3%. Dow Industrials down 71, a decline there of just about 0.2%. Worth pointing out that in the year-to-date column on the Bloomberg Professional Service, the Dow is now in the red for the year. NASDAQ lower today by 293 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That represents a drop right now of 2.2%. The 10-year yield, 4.94%, with a 2-year at 5.10%. Bitcoin up 2.8%. Bitcoin now at $34,592. Spot gold up $12.50 the ounce to $19.83, up 0.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, $85.30 right now for a barrel of WTI. Among the names reporting after the close of trading today, we will be hearing from Meta Platforms and IBM. Meta lower as part of a broad-based tech sell-off. We've got Meta down now by 4%, IBM slumping by 0.5%. Another major developing story, according to the Associated Press, the UAW does appear to be moving closer to a tentative contract agreement with Ford, the AP citing 2 unidentified people with knowledge of the talks. Now, according to the AP, the Ford deal would include cost of living pay increases that could lift the total pay raises above 30%. Ford shares, they're up right now by 1%. Other automakers advancing as well. GM up 1.1%. Stellantis right now up by 1.2%. So again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 1.3%. The Dow now negative on the year. 10-year yield 4.94%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
So go ahead to your terminal, do a news search for Johnson. You'll get the story, the headline, Trump ally Johnson elected speaker. Yeah, it actually happened. Not everyone apparently knew about Mike Johnson, with a lot of Googling here in Washington today. But yes, the Republican from Louisiana is the new Speaker of the House. How about it? Not a single member of the Republican conference voted against him. If you were with us last hour, we walked you through the whole thing live. We'll never forget. But as we wait to bring in Wendy Benjaminson here from the newsroom here in Washington, I want to bring it back to last evening. He is the Speaker now. He was the nominee last evening, gathered around the whole Republican conference following the secret vote to deliver a message of unity and to take a question or two, none of which went well, especially the one about his involvement in overturning or attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Rachel Scott from ABC dared to ask about it.
Next question.
Shot up was Virginia Fox, lawmaker, shoulder to shoulder with Lauren Boebert. I believe Mark Sanford was up there as well. No, not Mark Sanford. Wendy, help me out. Who was the lawmaker from South Carolina who yelled, "You lied" at Barack Obama?
Owens?
We're going to get that. I hate to put you on the spot. But he, interestingly, was there as well. I saw Steve Scalise behind him.
Yep.
But an interesting collection of people here. Is that going to be the look of this new speakership?
Welcome to your Republican Party. This is the Republican Party.
Lisa Camuso Miller didn't think that it was fair for me because it wasn't actually the now Speaker, Mike Johnson, doing the talking, but he was smiling through the whole thing.
He was smiling through the whole thing. He also did not tell anyone he's praising democracy, but part of democracy is a free press.
Yeah.
And our colleague Rachel Scott asked a perfectly legitimate question because he is the one who collected signatures for the amicus brief to try to go to the Supreme Court and try and overturn the election, which obviously failed. She asked a perfectly legitimate question, and he just looked down and said next and went to somebody else. And so, that this is sort of the atmosphere that the press will be operating in now.
She tried to ask another question about Israel and was told that she already got her question. Joe Wilson. I didn't even Google it. Joe Wilson's war. Yeah, Virginia Fox is... That's, I guess, what some of our reporters should be prepared for. But I don't know if that's fair. I'm open to Lisa's point. Maybe as Speaker Johnson takes on a whole new look and feel. He shows up and shakes hands with Hakeem Jeffries, and this is a new start.
Well, yes, and I will say he is making the right moves. He is already talking to his colleagues about a spending plan that will avert a government shutdown on November 17th. He has said he is open to aid to Ukraine. He would not answer the question about aid to Israel, but it would be hard for me to imagine Republicans not being in favor of aid to Israel. But the aid to Ukraine, he's sounding about, and he is not starting his speakership by saying, burn the place down, let's shut the government down. Yeah. He is going to try to keep it open. So maybe the mantle of leadership wears well on him. We don't know
Let's listen
yet.
to him right now. He's in the Speaker's rostrum now for the first time as Speaker of the House. This is live from Washington.
And my brothers
Speaker
Chris
Johnson.
and Josh and my sister Laura and all their families and all of our extended family in Louisiana. Family's a big deal, and we got a bunch of them. I especially want to thank all the extraordinary people of the great state of Louisiana. We have never had a Speaker of the House hail from our state, and so they've been lifting us up. I thank the people of Louisiana for the opportunity to serve you in Congress, and I'm humbled by your continuous support. We will make you proud. To my colleagues, I want to thank you all for the trust that you have instilled in me to lead us in this historic and unprecedented moment that we're in. The challenge before us is great, but the time for action is now, and I will not let you down. I want to say to the American people, on behalf of all of us here, we hear you. We know the challenges you're facing. We know that there's a lot going on in our country, domestically and abroad, and we are ready to get to work again to solve those problems, and we will. Our mission here is to serve you well, to restore the people's faith in this House, in this great and essential institution. My dad, it was mentioned, my dad was a firefighter. He was an assistant chief in the fire department in my hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, a little town in northwest Louisiana. On September 17, 1984, when I was 12 years old, he was critically burned and permanently disabled in the line of duty. All I ever wanted to be when I grew up was the chief of the fire department in Shreveport. But after the explosion on that fateful day, he nearly died, and it was a long road back, and it's changed all of our life trajectories. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And my dad, he lived with pain all the rest of his life for decades more. And I lost my dad to cancer 3 days before I got elected to Congress, 3 days. And he wanted to be there at my election night so badly. I'm the first college graduate in my family. This was a big deal to him. And so it was several weeks after that. It was early 2017. It was my freshman term, and it fell to me to be in the rostrum one night to serve here as Speaker Pro Tem. I thought that was a big deal until I figured out that's what you do for freshmen late at night. And I think if my memory serves, Miss Jackson Lee was winding down one of her long, eloquent speeches. And not that I was not enraptured by her speech, but I looked up at the top of the chamber there, and I saw the face of Moses staring down. And I just felt in that moment the weight of this place, right? The history that is revered here and the future that we are called to forge. And I really was just kind of almost overwhelmed with emotion.
Yeah.
It occurred to me in that moment, it had been several weeks, and I had not had an opportunity yet to grieve my dad's passing. And I just had this sense that somehow he knew. And I had tears come to my eyes, and I was standing here, and I'm wiping them away, and then it suddenly occurs to me, the late-night C-SPAN viewers are going to think something's very wrong with the new young congressman from Louisiana. It wasn't Sheila's speech. I'm sorry. I just knew in that moment that my dad, my father, would be proud of me, and I felt that he was. And I think all of our parents are proud of what we're called to do here. I think all the American people at one time had great pride in this institution, but right now, that's in jeopardy.
Yes, right.
And we have a challenge before us right now to rebuild and restore that trust. This is a beautiful country. It's the beauty of America that allows a firefighter's kid like me to come here and serve in this sacred chamber where great men and women have served before all of us and strive together to build and then preserve what Lincoln did refer to as the last best hope of man on earth. We stand at a very dangerous time. I'm stating the obvious. We all know that. The world is in turmoil. But a strong America is good for the entire world.